Pigmentation is actually one of the biggest skin conditions that we as skincare professionals see and deal with because it comes from so many different sources, whether it be ultraviolet radiation that accumulates with age, as we see in what we call sunspots or pigmentation spots. That's one of the biggest sources, but post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation from acne, from treatments that have gone awry, hormone imbalances, all kinds of sources. Okay, so what you're looking at here is an illustration of, again, the cell. The melanocyte is responsible for producing pigmentation in the skin, and it is referred to as a dendritic cell, which means it has these long finger-like projections called dendrites, and these are the channels by which the pigment ultimately reaches its destination. And when we see pigment in the skin, we're not seeing it in the melanocyte per se. We're not seeing it in the cell where it's produced. We're actually seeing it in the cells that they deposit or they become deposited in, and those are the keratinocytes that are making their way to the surface of the skin. So the melanocyte is kind of the factory that makes the pigment. The keratinocytes are the trucks that are delivering it to the surface, right? So that's an analogy I oftentimes use in my classes, and that's really where the melanocyte, the melanin is used for its most protective measures. It's actually being used closer to the surface of the skin to protect the cells underneath the surface, right? So the keratinocytes that are housing the melanin, they're found at the surface, and that's really where they're most effective for that protective mechanism. So again, melanocytes are making it, but the keratinocytes are utilizing it. It's being deposited into those keratinocytes as they make their journey up towards the surface. And we'll talk more about that, how that process occurs a little bit more in detail. We measure melanocyte activity in what's called MUs, or melanocyte units, and there's about 2,000 of these melanocyte units. So every melanocyte is responsible for making 36 keratinocytes. So one cell is making melanin for 36 other cells. It's making protection for 36 other cells. And you may say, well, that sounds like a pretty specific number, and it is. So no matter what the Fitzpatrick type is, if it's a Fitzpatrick 1 or a Fitzpatrick 6, we all have the same number of melanocytes. So I've heard in different lectures, high-level education, that is different, but there's very few cases where it varies. It can be up to 40, but it's usually very, very specific number of 36 keratinocytes per melanocyte. Something very different actually determines skin color, but it's these 2,000 melanocyte units per square millimeter of the face. It's relatively consistent no matter the Fitzpatrick type. When we talk about pigmentation, we generally put it into two separate categories. We have what's called constitutive and facultative pigmentation. So constitutive pigmentation is your natural, or what we refer to as genetic pigment. So if you're a Fitzpatrick 1, chances are your parents are a Fitzpatrick 1. If you're a Fitzpatrick 6, chances are you're a Fitzpatrick 6. Sometimes if you're somewhere in the middle, you can have a variation, but this is determined primarily by genetics. Facultative pigmentation is coming from some outside source, and some of the ones I've already previously mentioned. Ultraviolet radiation, that's a big one. Sunspots, post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation from acne, which we'll talk about. Hormones is another big one. So there's a number of different sources, but this is usually triggered by, in general, some type of outside source. All right, so moving on to the next slide. So this is what's referred to as the dark pathway. And in fact, I pulled this slide directly from Dr. Puglisi's Advanced Professional Skincare Medical Edition. There's a part of this that I'll explain here in just a moment that's not on here, which is the light pathway. But the dark pathway actually shows how you progress from the precursors of melanin, which is tyrosine, ultimately into the development of melanin. So if you see here all the way to the left of the slide where it says tyrosine, tyrosine is actually one of the essential amino acids. There's 20 of what we can find as called the standard amino acids found in the skin. I mean, a lot of them are building blocks of different proteins and materials in the epidermis and the dermis. Lysine, proline, alanine, valine, building blocks of all types of proteins, collagen, elastin, fibronectin, laminin, all types of proteins that are there to help to give structural integrity to the skin. But we call a lot of our skin lighteners in the industry tyrosinase inhibitors, whether it's kojic acid or hydroquinone or vitamin C or licorice extract. We refer to them as tyrosinase inhibitors, and that's because tyrosinase is the enzyme that takes tyrosine and converts it into a compound called DOPA2. So you'll see that at the bottom of the slide. DOPA2 then converts into something called dopaquinone 3 and then ultimately into melanin. So if you're using a tyrosinase inhibitor, it's blocking the enzyme tyrosinase from converting into those other materials and ultimately into the melanin. So certain ones will work a little bit better. If you read some of the literature and the research, you'll see that hydroquinone actually blocks both portions of that pathway. Some of the newer ones like phenylethyl resorcinol will block one portion better than the other. Undecylphenylalanine will block one of the portions better. Same with licorice extract or kojic acid. So again, this is again known as the dark pathway, where you see the portion just next to where it says dopaquinone 3. That's known as the light pathway, and that's the portion that actually starts to develop into the pheomelanin, which is the reddish or yellowish pigment. Okay, George, go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay, so what's next? So all of that is taking place. Everything that we just discussed is actually taking place inside the melanocyte. But once the melanin has actually been produced, as I've mentioned, the melanocyte is the factory. So it's got to be made. It's got to be transferred into the cell, into the keratinocyte, where it's able to be utilized. So it has to be packeted. It has to be polymerized into little packets called melanosomes. So the melanocyte is the cell that makes the pigment, but then it's polymerized and packed into little granules called melanosomes. The melanosomes are what gets transferred from the dendrites, the pathways, into the keratinocytes, the trucks that are carrying it to the surface. All right. So I know a lot of you are trying to visualize this, and I've got a couple slides here. But the melanosomes are the pigment granules that ultimately get into the keratinocytes, and that's what we're actually seeing as the pigmentation. They get close to the nucleus of the cell. As they move closer to the surface of the skin, they start to flatten out. And if you're exfoliating, that's what's giving some of the lightening effect that you see, the immediate lightening effect that you'll see from things like peels or manual exfoliants, things of that nature. But it's the melanosomes that are actually helping us to determine skin color, and I'll explain that in a little bit more depth here in just a moment. Next slide, George, the one that actually shows the skin section. Melanosomes must be transferred for the keratinocytes for skin color, to have skin color. You see, is that one up?
Okay, so I have why the skin color differs. So did you already talk about the melanosomes, the 20 per cell and the 200 per cell?
No, not yet. So what's next? The one right after, so what's next?
And while they're finding the slide, just to let everybody know, we have been getting quite a few questions about the slide presentation. So again, this is being recorded. We'll be sending out the recorded version, and we'll also include a digital handout that has all of the slides that you might have missed in the beginning. So don't worry, you'll be able to still see what Michael's been talking about, and we'll be sending that out once the webinar is completed.
So George, the one that says melanosomes must be transferred to the keratinocyte for skin to have color.
Okay, let's find out. Yep, that's the one that you're on.
Yes. Okay, so everyone, you can see here, this is just a diagram that shows the melanocyte, and it kind of resides in the basal layer, just below the basal layer, and it is stationary. Keep in mind that all the rest of the cells, as the basal layer is dividing and the keratinocytes are moving towards the surface, it's absolute worst. Those cells are going to be dividing once every 45 days. But the melanocyte, the life of the melanocyte in general, the life is about 10 years, which is, again, one of the reasons why it's capable of accumulating so much damage through UV exposure, in particular UVB. But again, it's going to be there. It's going to be depositing melanin by way of the dendrites, these melanosomes, as these cells are continuing to divide and move past. So just kind of visualize, even though we're looking at a static image here, that all of these cells that are surrounding the melanocyte are in perpetual motion. They're constantly moving up towards the surface of the skin. And if you can just kind of see, I wish you could see me pointing to this one, but just off to the center to the left, you almost see this little Pac-Man-like look of where these keratinocytes are literally eating these melanosomes, those little pigment granules, and pulling them into the keratinocyte, right? And it's oddly enough that we refer to it as a Pac-Man-like effect, because this process is called phagocytosis. phago means to eat, cytosis meaning cell process. It's a Greek phrase, phagocytosis. And the melanosomes are literally being eaten off the tip of the dendrite. So it's eating them and pulling them in, again, for the purposes of protection. So the melanocyte is there just cranking out this melanin to protect all of these cells, to protect the nucleus, and more specifically the DNA, but they're literally eating them off the tip of the dendrites on their way towards the surface. Now we're going to talk about how that particular mechanism can be utilized, can be disrupted for the purposes of lightening pigmentation, and now how we can kind of disrupt this whole process in general for treating hyperpigmentation. But again, if some of this is brand new to most of you, or some of you, it does take a little bit of time to go back and rethink and look at some of these processes, but this is truly the physiology of how pigmentation occurs, and when it goes wrong, that's why we start to see some of the pigmentation disorders that we do. All right, George, go ahead to the next slide of why skin color differs. So this is probably the biggest takeaway of the presentation, and that skin color differs because of the size and number of melanosomes per keratinocyte in the skin. A darker skin type is going to have at least 200 melanosomes in each keratinocyte, where a lighter skin type is going to have about 200 of the melanosomes per cell, right? So if it's a Fitzpatrick 6, you can probably expect 200 melanosomes per keratinocyte. They're going to be much larger. If it's a Fitzpatrick 1, there's going to be as few as 20, and they're going to be much, much smaller. And the closer to the middle of the Fitzpatrick scale that we go, the larger the number actually increases to get to that middle ground. So, this is a general number, and there's some variation in here, which I'm going to talk about in just a few moments. But this is the biggest takeaway, and this is truly why we see a difference in skin color. Caitlin, George, how are we doing on questions? Everybody still with us so far?
Yes, everyone is still with us. We did have a question regarding Fitzpatrick when you were going through the Fitz scale, referring to if the parents are Fitz 1 and Fitz 6, where you feel like the child would fall into the Fitzpatrick scale.
Well, in general, it's going to be somewhere in the middle, probably a Fitzpatrick 3, but this is where genes play a huge role. Depending on where they're coming from in the world, it's going to be somewhere in between, but I would probably guess that the estimations would probably say a 3. Any other questions?
Not as of now.
Okay. All right, George, go ahead and advance to the next slide. Now, this is something that's interesting, and this is another reason why we see a difference in skin color. And this has to do with also certain ethnic groups, in particular Asian and Latin ethnic groups. And it's a little bit more of a high-level concept. So try to follow me if this again is a lot of new information to you. We have something that's called tyrosinase positive and tyrosinase negative melanosomes, and this is something that's been known for a while, but it's really just starting to be understood as to exactly why. You can have in one cell, all the information I just explained to you, you can have in one cell melanosomes that have no pigment at all, but that also have some pigment to some. So for example, if you have 200 melanosomes in one cell and they're relatively large, you can have half of them that will have no pigment and half of them that will have pigment. And this is why we see a variation in those certain ethnic groups in the actual skin color. And again, this is relatively new. Some of you may be, if you're high-level educators and you've taken education classes before, maybe you even teach education classes on pigment. This is something that's relatively new to the industry, and genetics are entirely responsible for this right now. And this is one of the reasons why we're finding out that the same treatment protocols, when done on individuals, may not have consistent results. You may have fantastic results with one person and may have not so great results with another individual. And we are finding that genetics and possibly even epigenetics are playing a role into exactly why. So tyrosinase positive, tyrosinase negative melanosomes are playing a role here. So just something to keep in mind as you're digging deeper into the concept of pigmentation.
And we do
George,
have one quick question, Michael. If you just want to repeat again, it's the size and number of melanosomes versus the factories of the melanocyte. I think if we can just clarify that once more.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So that again, that's the biggest takeaway here, especially for those of you that are beginners. and really don't have a whole lot of, we've got students here that are watching this. We've got veterans that have been doing aesthetics for more than 20 years and practicing aesthetics for a very long time. So the number of melanocytes, the cells that make the pigmentation, are relatively consistent for everybody. Just about everyone has the same number. And I mentioned what's called a melanocyte unit, which is 1 melanocyte for every 36 keratinocytes. That's pretty consistent no matter if you're a Fitzpatrick 1 to a Fitzpatrick 6. What makes skin color different is the size and number of melanosomes. A dark skin type is going to have much larger melanosomes, pigment granules, in each of the keratinocytes, the rest of the skin cells that are moving towards the surface. They're going to be much bigger, and there's going to be a lot more of them. Lighter skin types are going to be smaller and have far fewer of them. And the last piece of that I mentioned are tyrosinase positive and tyrosinase negative melanosomes, meaning that you can have some with color and some without color. And that can create varying degrees of pigmentation in certain ethnic groups. And again, I encourage you that, we've got 2 hours allocated for a webinar, and usually when we've got 2 hours allocated, we run out of time or we end up going longer. And it seems like we'll probably end up going longer today, and that's just fine because this is going to be recorded and we'll be able to share this later. But do your research afterwards. Go to Google Scholar, hop online and see what some of the trade publications are saying about some of the concepts that I'm sharing with you, especially if you're new to the industry. Especially now because we all as an industry are having some downtime. So this is really an appropriate time to become educated, to take the time to educate yourself, to stay busy, to keep your mind sharp. Now's the time to put that effort forward. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that question.
Michael, we've got plenty of questions coming in. So again, if this does run over the 2 hours, it's being recorded. Feel free to jump off when you have to. But I think an important question that was asked was, when you're looking at the tyrosinase positive and tyrosinase negative, is this for both pheomelanin and eumelanin, and how is that showing up different on the skin?
That's a really good question, Caitlin, and I haven't done enough research on that to give an educated and informed answer just yet. So let's put that one in our back pocket, and we'll come back to that one a little bit later on, and hopefully be able to share some answers, if not on the webinar, on the forum a little bit later on. And let's let all the viewers know that are taking a look now that we do have a Circadia educational forum on Facebook, which is our entire community of estheticians and skincare professionals all over the world that can log on and share their stories and ask questions. We're doing posting and we're doing some educational stuff in there as well. So if you're listening and you're not already a part of that community, please go ahead and we'll make sure that you are indeed a skincare professional, and we'll get you approved. All right, Caitlin, any other questions before we move on? And again, let's take some of the the most pertinent ones because I know there's a lot coming in.
I think we're good for now, but
Okay.
we'll keep pausing for more questions.
Okay, George, let's move on to the melanocyte and the triggers slide. We'll have to make a reminder for both of us to number these for the next time.
Okay, Michael, we are on the triggers.
Okay, so again, these are just a few, but the ones that we talk about a lot when we're discussing skincare treatment options. But hormonal triggers are the big ones. We're going to talk a lot about alpha MSH, which is the one you see on the right hand side there, which is melanin stimulating hormone, and that plays a huge role in the hows and whys that we see pigmentation. Ultraviolet radiation is one that we can all relate to as skincare professionals because it's one that we see the most, especially in the aging population, and it's usually years and years of sun damage that the clients are coming to us and saying, hey, I've got this pigmentation spot, what can you do for that? And then inflammation in general of most kinds that can be triggered. There are some exceptions there. You usually don't see pigmentation with rosacea specifically because it's more vascular. It has a vascular etiology, so there are some exceptions, but inflammatory procedures, laser, chemical peels, things like that, those are kind of notorious for actually creating hyperpigmentation that we have to deal with a little bit later, but acne is another one that we'll cover later. We'll save pro-opio melanocortin for another day, but that's a larger hormone that we'll that we'll talk about. We're going to cover this again. By those of you again that are watching, we're giving broad strokes on these conditions today. We're going to be doing an in-depth webinar with lip gloss and aftershave. And Caitlin, just give some details on when that is.
Sure. So Michael will be featured on the virtual festival for lip gloss and aftershave, and it's going to be 3 p.m. Eastern time on March 30th. And that's going to go through all of the pigmentation causes disorders as well as treatments. So we have been getting questions on, what Circadia product is going to be most beneficial for treating constitutive versus facultative and other treatment options that we have available. We're going to be touching on that a little bit in the upcoming slides, but Michael's going to have a full, I think 2 hours actually, to really dive into pigmentation and its treatments. And that we'll send a link out to everybody when we follow up on this webinar with the slides, the recording, and then I'll also make sure to include the link to register for the virtual festival.
Okay, great. Thank you, Caitlin. We're really excited about that. We did an interview with Barry and Jenny from Lip Gloss and Aftershave. They've got, they've just been fantastic. Our whole aesthetic community has really been coming together to help each other. So we're excited to be participating with that event. George, okay, let's move to pathways of pigmentation.
All right, we are there.
Okay, pathways of pigmentation. So we're going to discuss tyrosinase and melanin formation, exfoliation, alpha MSH hormone, and melanosome transfer. The next slide, George, go ahead and advance. This is a static image again, and I often talk in our classes about being wary of when we look at a slide or a presentation or a textbook, that the skin is not a static image. It's never standing still, right? When you fall asleep at night, your skin cells are not where they are the next morning when you wake up. It's constantly moving, and that's how it's designed to work. So everything that makes that skin that's at the very bottom layer a living, viable cell is being pushed out, right? The nucleus, the brain of the cell, the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, the Golgi apparatus, the endoplasmic reticulum, the things that make lipids and proteins, everything that makes it functional is being pushed out until it reaches the surface. It's being corneified. There's nothing but bundles of keratin at the surface. But as all that's taking place, the melanocyte is depositing melanin at the lower levels. So again, by the time it reaches the very surface of the skin, it is a stratum corneum cell. It's been completely corneified, almost nothing but keratin left there, but the melanin has been deposited. It's inside there, and it's flattened out, and it's there again for the purposes of photoprotection, which when we slough it off or when we exfoliate it off, which is one of the reasons why you see a lightening effect almost immediately, even if it's a very mild enzyme exfoliation or even a manual exfoliant, something relatively gentle, the skin almost instantly looks brighter. It's because we're getting rid of what's at that very surface and creating that immediate brightening effect. But what's there is constantly moving. So we always like to discuss and remind our estheticians that that's what's happening. George, go ahead and advance to the next slide on melanogenesis. So this is a slide that I borrowed from one of our ingredient suppliers, Lucas Meyer, which makes an ingredient that I'm going to detail. But I've been hard pressed to find a slide that's more comprehensive than this one that we have here. The details, as you can see, the ultraviolet exposure, leading oftentimes to the development of things like alpha MSH binding to the receptors on the outside of the melanocyte, triggering the entire process that we're talking about, which is the melanogenesis, the production of pigment, the making of melanin. And what's happening here is these messages that are being sent from the outside cells, from ultraviolet exposure, from aggressive treatments, from things, all these outside sources that we've been talking about, sending the message to the DNA saying, hey, we need additional protection up here. We need you to make melanin. The outside cells are triggering this message. And then, of course, as we've mentioned, the melanosomes being polymerized, they travel up these dendrites and then ultimately get deposited into the keratinocytes as they're making their journey up to the surface of the skin. So this is the most comprehensive slide that I've probably come across that details this process. So here it is. You got your hands on it. We're taking a look. So make sure that you have this. Now, what we're going to take a look at next, the next slide, George, if you advance that, is the different portions of the pathway that can actually be blocked. And I use this slide in particular, which is great. But if you can see to the right here, we have an ingredient. The trade name on the ingredient is called beta white. And beta white is a peptide that has been recognized as helping to bind up receptors that are on the outside of the melanocyte that are responsible for receiving message to trigger the process of making melanin. They actually help to bind up the receptors that will trigger the entire process of producing pigmentation. Now, this is a very different way of looking at treating hyperpigmentation. I mentioned tyrosinase inhibitors, and I'm sure most of you have heard that phrase before. And again, whether it's hydroquinone or vitamin C or licorice extract or whatever it is that you may be working with, that's the big category of skin lighteners that we see out there. But there's a few, just a handful, that are capable of doing that. And beta white is probably one of the most effective. This is, again, it's another peptide technology, and they're capable of binding up these receptors that block the message. So it's a much more preventative way of looking at treating hyperpigmentation. It basically helps to slow the process before it's ever initiated, before it's ever engaged. So again, a lot of you that aren't overly familiar, I hope that phrasing makes sense. There's another that we're going to take a look at here as well, which is melanosome transfer inhibition, right? So think of it this way. We're going to switch gears here. Look at the slide where you see the dendrites, the tip of the green cell here, the melanocyte, the tip of that dendrite, those little pigment granules that are moving all the way up to the top and then they make their way into that keratinocyte. By the time that gets in there, that's that phagocytosis process. That's when it ends up in the cell. There's an ingredient that we use a lot in professional skincare called niacinamide. And niacinamide is a fantastic anti-inflammatory, but it's also been recognized as a melanosome transfer inhibitor. It can actually stop the transfer, or at least slow the transfer of the melanosomes into the keratinocyte. So what I just detailed for you are 3 very specific ways that we can help to slow the pigment process down. We can actually slow down how pigment develops in the skin. So tyrosinase inhibitors, those are the big ones. We talk about those a lot. Most skincare companies, skincare brands focus a lot on that. But we have this other mechanism for helping to bind up the receptors on the outside of the melanocyte. And then we have the melanosome transfer inhibition. So if you're using all 3 of these mechanisms, if you have ingredient technology that helps to address all 3 of these, you're going to get a good result. Right. And again, there's other factors, including tyrosinase positive, tyrosinase negative, that can influence how good your results are. The source of the pigmentation, depending on what it is, genetics. There's a lot of other factors that are going to play into how well the client responds to the treatment options and the home care. But if you're using these 3 mechanisms, you're going to get a great result. Of course, sunscreen photo protection, using a sunscreen, protecting from ultraviolet radiation, those things are absolutely critical to getting any kind of good result treating hyperpigmentation, because the moment they get an unprotected exposure, it comes right back. And there are some ingredients that are safer than others. We talk about hydroquinone a lot in the industry and the potential rebound effect that it can have, especially if you're using higher concentrations. Patrick types in particular, at high concentrations, anything above 2%, are prone to something called achranosis, which is actually dermal pigmentation. We actually start to see the pigment, when it's used over a longer period of time, start to make its way into the dermal tissue and it gets stuck there, right? At its worst, the epidermis is turning over at a maximum of about 45 days. But when you look at the turnover in the dermal tissue, it's almost non-existent, right? The half-life of elastin is 70 years, which means that half of the elastin that you're born with, you have for 70 years, and the skin's always making more, but it stays there. So darker skin types are prone to this particular skin condition, and it almost looks like a spotty raised microcomedone-like lesions, but then it gets more of a raised purplish texture. So if you want to, go to Google Images and Google a condition called achranosis, and you'll actually see what this looks like. And it's directly linked to the overuse of something called hydroquinone. And there are some, a level that's generally recognized as safe, but the longer it's used and the higher the concentrations, the more potential you have. And as I mentioned, it's more so the darker Fitzpatrick types that could potentially be prone to this. So our recommendation is Circadia. We don't use any of it. There are some other options that are out there, and it's best not to risk it, in my opinion.
Michael, can you just briefly touch on the benefits and possible drawbacks of using kojic acid as a potential skin lightener, and then also just detail out one more time melanogenesis?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, kojic acid is good. I've seen some really good results with it. We also don't use that here at Circadia. You have to be consistent with the use. I know some brands will use it in a one-time application, which can work, but I've seen it be most effective at anywhere from 1% to 3%. The higher the concentration, usually the better it is. But in particular, for a lighter skin type, the more frequent the use, the more potential to develop a sensitivity to it. So again, most pigmentation issues that arise aren't a quick fix. Is there something else going on that's going to require a much more longer course of treatment, a longer time for them to be using the product? So if you can get under control in a shorter period of time, kojic acid is a good option. But the more frequent the use, the more potential you have to develop a sensitivity to it, meaning that you can't use it over a longer period of time. And again, that's more associated with a lighter skin type. So certainly a higher safety profile than long-term hydroquinone use, but still has some issues with it. And then again, just kind of detailing melanogenesis in general. So it's going all the way back to the first slide. It's tyrosine, which is the amino acid that we start with, and that is converted to two separate compounds by the enzyme tyrosinase. So tyrosine, which is one of those essential amino acids, is converted to dopa-2 and then into dopa-quinone 3 by the enzymes tyrosinase. So again, if you're using tyrosinase inhibitors, it slows that down, ultimately into the eumelanin. But that's all happening within the melanocyte. That whole process is triggered most of the time by hormones and other cell communication messengers by alpha MSH. I mean, there are some exceptions there, but that happens. All these receptors that are on the outside of the melanocyte, they receive messages. They will actually receive those triggers from outside sources. So there's messages that are coming to the melanocyte telling it, hey, make that pigment. And the big one that we can all relate to again is ultraviolet exposure. There's when the cells are radiated at the surface of the skin, this is why we get a tan. The cells are radiated at the surface of the skin. They're sending messages down to the melanocyte saying, hey, we need additional photoprotection. Let's get some melanin up here ASAP. And that's why you see a tan develop in relatively short order. That's melanogenesis at work. And all those melanosomes are being deposited in the keratinocytes and moving up relatively quickly. So again, I know a lot of you that are tuning in are relatively new to this information, but it certainly takes time to really understand it and for it to become second nature.
Michael, I like the way you kind of put that back in full circle. So I also really enjoyed the analogy that you typically say about the whole factory, the roads. So I kind of want to just mention that really quick. So I came back to the melanocyte slide right here. I know there was a little kind of confusion when we were first putting up the presentation. So the biggest thing, so kind of the factory that is going to produce the pigmentation is called the melanocyte. So if you look at this kind of cartoon image right here, if you look where that arrow is pointing, that is a melanocyte. So the best way to think about this melanocyte is think of it as a factory. What this factory is going to produce is melanin. It's going to produce pigmentation. Then also within that melanocyte, if you look around there, you see those little kind of dark compact spheres. Those dark compact spheres are called the melanosomes. So the melanosomes is housing the pigment. It's housing the melanin in there as well. So if we're going back to that kind of factory analogy, think of the melanosomes as like a truck or a vehicle that's housing melanin. And then if you look at those finger-like projections that are coming up, those are what are going to be considered the dendrites. Best way to think about those, think of those as the roads that are going to deliver up. It's going to kind of, the melanosomes are going to go up those roads. And then kind of those pink kind of static image that you see there, those are the keratinocytes. So as the keratinocytes, they're never in the same place at the same time. They're constantly moving. However, every single time that those move up to the surface of the skin, it's almost like that little Pac-Man Michael was talking about, where it's actually pulling in those melanosomes on there as well. So whenever we address pigmentation, there's a couple different things that we can do, which Michael was talking about. We can have tyrosinase inhibitors. So tyrosine is going to pretty much start the process of creating that melanin in there, or the tyrosinase in there. So we can utilize like tyrosinase inhibitors to treat pigmentation. We can also utilize melanosome transfer inhibitors to treat pigmentation. And then we can also utilize alpha MSH inhibitors to treat pigmentation. However, the number one thing to take in consideration whenever you're treating pigmentation is protection. If you have a client that's not protecting their skin during the day to that ultraviolet exposure, it's pointless utilizing their ingredients at night. One other thing that we didn't really put in this slide, but another way to treat pigmentation, if they are on these melanosome transfer inhibitors, these tyrosinase inhibitors, is just increasing cell turnover. So a lot of the times with our retail regimens or even our treatment room kind of protocols, we include something that is going to exfoliate the skin. We may put them on a chemical peel regimen. We may put them on a topical vitamin A, because that's designed to increase cell turnover. It's not going to suppress melanocyte activity, but the client is going to see the results a lot quicker on there.
Awesome. George, thank you for the summary on that. I know it's a lot of information and we're moving fast, and we did have some technical difficulties at the beginning, but hey, we're learning experience for everyone here today. Okay, George, let's talk a little bit about the treatment options. We'll talk about some of the home care and some of the treatment options that the estheticians can use in the back bar.
Yeah. So right now, what you see on this.
Let's advance to. I'm on amendola cleanser. Let's move to that one.
Perfect. We're there.
Okay. So this is one of our first cleansing options, and this one is probably one of the most effective for treating pigmentation, because the ingredient decks that we're using, two of the ones that are my favorite here for initially treating pigment, are lactic and mandelic acid. So both have great tyrosinase inhibiting capacity, and both are also relatively gentle exfoliators. So lactic acid is probably, it's one of the darlings of the industry when it comes to alpha hydroxy acids. It's hydrating, helps to inhibit hyperpigmentation. It's a natural acid that's found in the body, so if there's too much of it, it can actually be relatively easily processed by the body and by the skin, ultimately converted to something called pyruvic acid, which is used for energy production. Mandelic acid is and has been a rising hero for quite some time now. Not only is it very effective for treating pigmentation, but it's also antimicrobial, which makes it great for acne. So this has a pretty broad application for treating not just pigment, but also acne, also pigment associated with acne. So really, this is good for a pretty broad audience. It's a true milk cleanser. There's no foaming agents that are in here. It has a surfactant that will help to emulsify oil, but it's relatively gentle for most clients. We have some oat protein here, some sweet almond milk, so it has a lot of nourishing properties, helps to keep the skin hydrated, and really, really nice all-purpose cleanser for most people. If you need a foamer, if you've got a lot of heavy oil, you may find that you need to alternate this with one of the other cleansers. And again, for treating pigment or acne, we do like to use the micro exfoliating honey cleanser, but this is a very, very powerful tool for helping to treat hyperpigmentation. This is the retail size, but it does come in a professional back bar size, which is the 16 ounce.
And if any of you find yourselves quarantined or social distancing and you're dying for a hydrating and exfoliating mask to use at home, we suggest to apply this to damp skin, maybe if you're in the shower or in the bath, and leave it on for anywhere between 7 to 10 minutes. And it will give you a gentle exfoliation, but also help to increase the hydration level of the skin. So if you already have it in your shower, it's something that you can do today and just get a nice little instant brightening and exfoliation.
And we're going to be sharing with everyone some great packages, some discounted packages, because we know that there's a lot of uncertainty about how things are going right now, what's going on in the country, all over the world. Everyone, again, social distancing, so you can't get to the spa, but you have access, and we are doing drop shipping to your clients. So that's a service that we're offering. If you are a spa owner and your business is currently closed, we're going to be drop shipping some packages. So we're here to help as best we possibly can, but maybe you are trying to get product yourself. So we want to ease the economic uncertainty as much as possible. So we'll talk about that towards the end of the webinar. George, go ahead and let's talk about the licorice and bearberry brightening mist. One of the things that you'll notice about Circadia is that we have a relatively marked absence of toners in the line. Toners came about in the industry to help to bring the pH of the skin back after the surfactants, the foaming agents that are used in cleansers and bar soaps, bring the pH relatively high. When you look at what used to be used and some of the bar soaps that used to be used from drugstores, they have very high pHs, some of them as high as 10. What's used in personal care in general now, and certainly not in the Circadia line, they all have relatively acidic pHs. They're all really closely matching the pH of the skin, which is anywhere from 4.5 to 5.5. And I don't really like to use the term pH balance, but it's something that the consumer generally understands. So it doesn't really have we don't really have the need or the necessity for a toner these days, but people understand it as a step. So what we have in the Circadia range are functional mists. These are things that people can use. They have great botanical extracts. They make for really good spray applications. A lot of people will spray them on or spray them into a 4x4 or a cotton round and just apply them to the skin. They've got great hydrating properties, skin conditioning properties. This one, as you might imagine, licorice and bearberry, great brightening ingredients, things that you would typically see as botanicals in a formulation. But we've said this before, and some of you may have heard this, I find that a lot of these ingredients, these formulations that we talked about, they have the same efficacy as serums in many ways. So this could actually be kind of almost like a prep serum that you're going to find that may be circulating out there. Kayla, you want to add anything to that? Because I know you've been a champion of messaging out there that, hey, these work better than most of the serums that I've used.
Yes, for sure. I mean, and we usually talk about this as having the same purity and the same potency as your traditional serums, but they're just in an easy application form of a mist. We have clients who spray this on, multiple times a day. It's great for just throwing into your gym bag or even keeping it in your purse to set mineral makeup, but also knowing that it is, again, having the purity and the potency of some of your traditional serums. So the mists are used quite frequently in your treatment room as well, instead of incorporating water into your cleanser or anything else that might get diluted if you have to mix with water. If you just add in one of the mists instead, it's really going to bump up the efficacy of your treatment.
Awesome. Thank you, Keelan.
One thing I do want to mention on that, so Caitlin and Michael mentioned how it's just as pure and potent as a traditional treatment serum. However, you'll notice that it has a pretty aggressive pump on there as well. The reason why that pump or that sprayer is so aggressive is because we did not dilute the active ingredients to kind of benefit the sprayer. So traditional mists and sprays out there are typically 90% water and 10% actives, where this is just going to be super potent, super active. So with all of our treatment mists, there's different application methods to utilize. Some clients will actually spray it on a 2x2 or a cotton round and kind of infuse it into their skin. Some of them will spray it up into the air, let it fall onto the skin, or some of them will spray it in their hands and press it on the skin. Me personally, I spray. I'm addicted to misting. I'm gonna kind of announce that right now. I'm addicted to all of our functional mists and our sprays. I just go an arm's reach length at a distance, and I just fully commit to the sprayer as well.
It does require a full commitment, George. You are 100% right, and and you hit it on the head there. It's the consistency, it's the texture. It is a high shear mist, meaning it's designed to disperse it, but it's the viscosity of the product that requires you to really get a good pump there. And those of you that have used the product know that it's fantastic, but know what we're talking about. So yeah, great pointer there. Thank you, George, for letting the audience know. Okay, let's talk about the Bright White, because this is one of my favorite products, and we see great results pretty quickly, very consistently with our brightening system, and a lot of you that are already fans out there that are users can really attest to that. And it has a lot to do with some of the ingredient technology that we're using here together and the synergy of that. The Regufade is a trans resveratrol. Resveratrol comes from grapeseed, grape skin extract. There's a couple other sources, but this one in particular is a trans resveratrol. So it solubilizes and it plays with the other ingredients very nicely. The one that we have here, and it's a bit of a tongue twister, it's called tetrahexadecyl ascorbate. It's an oil-soluble form of vitamin C. Vitamin C in any form that you can get it stable, where it's not oxidized, is great. And this one has kind of taken over as the industry leader as the go-to oil-soluble form of vitamin C for stability. But the company that produces this and distributes it, put out some data not that long ago about the efficacy at a high percentage of this vitamin C for its lightening ability. And I was incredibly impressed with the results. So we have it in there at a very, very high concentration, and the synergy with this and some of the other active ingredients really makes it a standout product. Phenylethyl resorcinol is another brightening ingredient. It's called Symwhite, comes from a company called Symrise, and this is kind of a next generation tyrosinase inhibitor. What's interesting about this one is not only does this work against the eumelanin, the brownish or blackish pigment, it's also been shown to be extremely effective against the pheomelanin, which is the reddish or yellowish pigment. And then, of course, we have Marubium stem cell extract, which is great for just overall skin immune defenses, and Tyrostat, which is a Canadian plant extract, which has shown comparable results to, or even better to, licorice extract. So it's a little bit of that additional plant extract, just combining some of the gifts of Mother Nature, which is really what Circadia is known for. I mean, our whole concept is based on circadian rhythms. We're known as a science brand, an education brand, but we really recognize the gifts of Mother Nature and being able to incorporate those too. But we love the Bright White Serum, fantastic results there. Now, when we're using these as a system, George, go ahead and advance to the White Belt Brightener product. When we're using these together, people ask, well, which one should I use? Which product do I use if I really want to get rid of my pigmentation? They're really designed to be used together. So you're cleansing first, you're using the mist after you cleanse, you're applying the Bright White Serum on your darker, deeper hyperpigmented lesions, and then you're using the White Belt Brightener as your quote moisturizer all over for helping to lighten the entire face. Now, most of what we're using here is great, and some of the ingredients that are used in the industry, it's like there's a timeline that they should be used. What's the safe amount of time that you can use these? That's a question we get all the time. Well, relatively indefinitely. Most of what we have here is designed to promote overall skin health. These are things that are helping to nourish the skin, vitamin C, niacinamide. These are nourishers for the skin, so they're going to promote overall health. They just have great skin lightening capabilities as well. So White Belt Brightener is where you're going to find some things that are a little bit more traditional. As I mentioned, the niacinamide, it's fantastic for helping to reduce inflammation, but it also helps with that melanosome transfer inhibition. It's a really powerhouse ingredient for helping to treat pigment in general, but also more so for an acneic skin type. We have it in the daytime control, which we're going to cover in a little bit. Alpha-arbutin is actually a glycosylated form of hydroquinone, but there's no danger to using that. It doesn't have the rebound effect or any of the potential side effects that you see with hydroquinone, so it's a really good alternative. Chromobrite, Sepia-White, those are also kind of next generation tyrosinase inhibitors that we see that are great alternatives to hydroquinone that have been promoted through the industry. Chromobrite comes from the same company that makes ingredients like argireline and Snap-8, some really great peptide technology in the industry. Aminopropyl ascorbyl phosphate is just yet another form of vitamin C that's out there. That one is a little bit more of a water soluble, but it works very well in this formulation. Again, it's about how ingredients function together. And you can have the best ingredients in the world, but unless they function well together, unless the pH is consistent across the board, there's going to be some problems by the time they sit on the shelf for a little while. And one of the things that we're great at here at Circadia is having research and development and a great history of R&D at the company for a very long time, and that's my grandfather, Dr. Pugliese. He's been doing this since 1971 when he started Society of Cosmetic Chemists, and he's 94 now, and he's still a powerful and influential voice in the industry. And we just have him to thank that this company for the last 20 years has just been built on the pillars of what he has done and laid out here for us. Again, beta white is another one of those ingredients that we talked about earlier. That's one of the alpha MSH inhibiting ingredients that helps to bind up the receptors on the outside of the melanocyte. So what you're looking at here, just by itself, is a very comprehensive, very complete brightening product. This alone is going to get great results for the majority of clients that you're seeing that are having pigmentation issues. But as a system as a whole, you're going to get fantastic results. Now, I say that knowing that everybody responds a little bit differently to treatment options, right? Everybody's pigmentation issues that they're dealing with are coming from different sources. So the key to keep in mind is to be patient, be consistent, understand that protection from the sun is absolutely paramount to make sure that the results stay consistent. So just keep in mind that that's something that has to be done. Caitlin, any other additions before we move on to showing and sharing some of the results that we've achieved with some of the treatment options?
We do, yes. We've got quite a few questions, so bear with us here, but hopefully we're answering all the questions as they come in on the chat section. But we have been getting quite a few questions regarding the BVOSC. Is there any way that you can disclose the percentage of the BVOSC that we're using?
Yeah, so here's, and I'm willing to do that, and the reason why is that we try to be as open and transparent as we possibly can with our information. The company that distributes this is distributed by a company called Barnett, and their data shows that it's effective as well as 1% as a skin lightener. We're using it at 10% in this particular product. So that's high. That's quite a bit, and it works well. So, and that's just one ingredient. If you're using just 10% in a formulation with nothing else in it, you're going to start to see the skin get lighter. But that's just one.
Okay, great. And then if we can just kind of recap, and also including in the vitamin C, since it's not technically in this section, but it is such a wonderful product to be using for lightening. If you can just go through the order of application for AM and PM, just so people can get a good feel for what their products would be, what order the product should be used in.
Sure, absolutely. So when it comes to just the brightening product specifically, for AM, your cleansing, licorice and bearberry brightening mist, bright white serum. If you're incorporating our vitamin C reversal serum, you're going to put the vitamin C reversal serum on first. So that would go in between the bright white serum and the vitamin C would go on between the licorice and bearberry brightening mist and the bright white serum. Then the white veil brightener, then the SPF. So that would be your order of application.
Okay, perfect. And we do have this all written out in a chart, so we can include that in the follow-up email as well. So we can do our skin regimens chart. And then we also had quite a few questions about mixology. So we'll also.
It reminds me of a funny meme that I just saw on Instagram a day or so ago from our estheticians. It said from a client, "I'm ready to follow your 25-step skincare regimen."
We also have quite a few questions on our brightening products as far as treating pregnant or nursing clients.
Sure. Go ahead.
So in general, we really suggest to err on the side of caution. We always suggest for your client to speak directly to their OB and make sure that they have all of the information. That's one of the main reasons why we give full ingredient disclosure on our tech manuals. But again, with erring on the side of caution, we usually suggest to stay with the vitamin C reversal serum and really just start to work more preventative. And then once you're completed nursing, then you can start to incorporate more of the aggressive ingredients. But it's always up to the soon-to-be mom to make those decisions, and that's why we give full ingredient disclosure.
And there are things that should be avoided no matter what. I mean, salicylic acid, hydroquinone. There's some things that should be avoided in general, and those are relatively easy to spot. But I mean, there's some questions about vitamin A, whether that should or could be used. I mean, going all the way back to when Dr. Kligman was using retinoic acid on the line of demarcation for treating pigment on the stomach of pregnant women, and they were finding tetragenic growths afterwards. Tetragenesis is something that happens when you have additional growth on the fetus. Not harmful in any way to the baby, but it's something that can be found afterwards. But it's because of the additional cell division or proliferative effect that's caused from vitamin A. But it's the type of vitamin A that was used, it's where it was placed. So yeah, there's some controversy about that, but in general, there's some things that should be avoided. But always, of course, check with your physician, make sure that they have the clearance to use the product, because in this day and age, it could potentially be a liability issue. But for the most part, cosmetic ingredients are designed to be GRAS certified, generally recognized as safe, but certainly check with the physician first. You always want to make sure that you're covered, and we do have a pregnancy statement that we can make sure that you have available to show to the physician as well.
We've also had quite a few people ask the question about the bright white serum, and we do suggest that is a spot treater. If you are
Yes.
looking to have an overall lightening product, the white veil brightener is going to be a little bit better of an option for you, because the bright white is really meant to be more of a spot treater. And then another question we've had come through quite a bit is if we can define what we refer to as a next generation or a second generation ingredient. And when we start talking about the vitamin C reversal serum, that'll give you a really good definition of what we refer to as second generation. But Michael, if you want to maybe talk a little bit about like first generation, and then it's like the iPhone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the cosmetic industry has been around for quite some time, but the advances that have taken place over the last, I look at it in waves and phases. I mean, I've been part of Circadia now. I joined the company in 2004. I mean, I literally started packing boxes straight out of college, and it went from packing boxes to taking orders to customer service to I don't know how education, and then formulary development, making products to ultimately becoming the CEO. So I've literally done it all here, but I've seen so many transitions in the industry already in just these 15 years. And you look at things that started out with glycolic acid, and then the movement from glycolic acid to gentler options like lactic acid, and then mandelic acid. When I started, there was literally 5 peptides available that were on the market. Now there's hundreds. Things like retinol. I mean, retinol was a cosmetic ingredient, knowing that retinol itself can be relatively unstable if it's not adapted. Then there was esters, retinol acetate, retinol palmitate, retinol propionate. These are all things that are available now. Vitamin C, ascorbic acid on its own in an aqueous solution will oxidize relatively quickly. So you had the adaptations of things like magnesium ascorbyl phosphate, tetrahexadecyl ascorbate, which we've talked about, and the list goes on and on. Aminopropyl ascorbyl phosphate, ascorbyl glucoside. These are all next generation, second generation ingredients, and even the skin lighteners as well. Things like hydroquinone. These are all technologies, are the first ones that I mentioned. They started early, and yes, they had their place. They still have their place in the industry, but when you look at what can happen when you're using some of these things, they can actually incite quite a bit of inflammation, especially when they're being used on their own altogether in relatively antiquated formulations. And when you start looking at emulsifying ingredients and some of the older not just emulsifiers, but emollients and even humectants that had been used and are still used in the concentrations they were used in, they can actually create quite a bit of damage to the skin. So the adaptations that have occurred in the cosmetic industry, the formulary side of the industry, that's what we talk about. That's what we're referring to with next generation, second generation, third generation ingredient technology, intelligent ingredient technology, as we discuss it, as we talk about it.
So I think, Caitlin, based on time, I feel like we should move on. And then the questions that we didn't answer, we can shoot an e-blast out with all the common questions to all the attendees. Are you guys okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we advance to the next slide, George, on the treatment, but the before and afters. And Caitlin, you can talk a little bit about the treatment protocol that we used for that 8-week clinical study for this one, and also for the Mandelic Clear. And then we can talk a little bit about the Mandelic Clear and the vitamin A.
Yes, absolutely. So this was one of the 8-week clinicals that we had that was a contestant with the Skin Games a couple of years ago. And what's interesting is that for this particular client, we started her off with an anti-age regimen, and really we're trying to focus on age management. But you would think, looking at her before pictures, that she was possibly a smoker, but it turns out she was actually a hot yoga teacher. So with accelerated ATP production, with the high heat that can potentially cause some chronic inflammation, she was starting to notice this accelerated aging. So with this particular treatment protocol, for the first actual week and a half, it was just age management ingredients. There wasn't any skin lighteners. So you will notice with all of your clients is that aging and pigmentation go hand in hand. So when you start to see a lightening of pigment, you're usually going to start to see refining of your fine lines, wrinkles, and even increasing your moisture deficiencies as well. So we, again, sticking with an 8-week period, which for pigmentation, aging, acne, sometimes with some clients, you do need more than 8 weeks. So we were fairly aggressive to begin with, just to make sure we could fit everything that we needed into this 8 weeks. Clearly, that's not going to be for everybody, but we were really very focused on using our Mandeli Clear Peel system, which Michael will talk about in upcoming slides. And then she was on the full brightening regimen. So she did White Veil Brightener, she did Bright White Serum, Licorice and Bearberry Brightening Mist, Vitamin C Reversal Serum, and then we also added in the Vitamin A Accelerator. So as Michael was talking about, having something that's going to force cell transcription or push those cells to the surface of the skin faster, it leaves less time for that melanin deposition to happen. So again, why an 8-year-old goes to the beach and holds a tan for a few days versus an 80-year-old who may hold their tan for a few weeks or months, it's the same concept. So incorporating the vitamin A boosting cream can really be that missing link when you're trying to treat both pigmentation and your age management. We were also incorporating some light enzyme treatments using our Australian superberry antioxidant mask in between her peels. This is going to not only help to clean up some of the surface proteins that are kind of hanging on a little bit longer after the peel, but it also has that same collection of mandelic and lactic acid that's going to be a really good skin brightener, but also having some berries that are indigenous to the Australian outback for really wonderful second generation antioxidant support. So we have all of the protocols written. So if you're interested in getting the protocols that we're using on any of these case studies, feel free to email me and I'll be happy to send those out. I'll put my email in the chat section. So if you need to email me, it's Caitlin, Katelyn at circadia.com. And again, I'll put it in the chat section.
All right, Caitlin, let's talk to them a little bit about specifically the Mandeli Clear Peel. You can talk them through the protocol on the next slide.
Sure. So what we wanted to do here is really highlight the fact that our Mandeli Clear Peel system by itself has really powerful lightening properties. So this particular client is from the UK, and she did not have any Circadia home care and didn't change any of her home care products, and she really wasn't using anything. So we spaced these treatments out. It was 3 treatments spaced out 60 to 90 days. And you can see obviously significant lightening. We did do the max amount of layers for each treatment. So we did 3 layers of the Mandeli Clear, which is a modified Jesner. It's 7% salicylic, 7% lactic, 7% resorcinol with a 12% mandelic acid. And then we also layered on 3 layers of our vitamin A accelerator, which is a 2.5% retinol. So we did 3 layers of each per treatment. And again, you can see that she has a noticeable difference in the lightening of her pigmentation. And again, there was no home care associated with this before and after.
Awesome, thank you. And George, I know you're following me on the slides here, so as I just talk about the next slide, you just go ahead and follow me. So again, folks that are watching at home here, we're going to detail real quickly the actual composition of the peel. This is a modified Jesner, and this is relatively common in the industry to modify the composition. The standard Jesner, which we're not really going to detail today, but a standard Jesner is 14% of lactic, 14% salicylic, and 14% resorcinol, which we do have. It's typically a medical peel because of the composition that's in there. Resorcinol is a little bit different of a material. It has to be treated a little bit differently because of what it is. And it's pretty aggressive as far as the composition goes. You can usually expect anywhere from 5 to 10 days of significant peeling. So to modify it, we cut down the percentages to half of that standard 14%, but we've added 9% mandelic. So you still have a 30% accumulation of active ingredients so that you can use it in many of the states that have restrictions on percentages. But it really made it extremely effective for treating hyperpigmentation. So as Caitlin mentioned, we've gotten some really great results with this. But as you can see with the vitamin A accelerator is a 2.5% retinol. So we've got protocols for these and how to treat certain levels of pigmentation, even different Fitzpatrick types. And this is a 2.5% retinol. So this is again only a treatment product. This is only for the back bar. You can go up to as high as 3 layers of the peel and 3 layers of the vitamin A accelerator. And we've got a lot of examples of this. Again, if you're going to be in the forum, or if you're already in the forum, you can see the different levels of peeling. Peeling is going to vary from client to client, depending on who they are. Sometimes people will peel significantly. Sometimes people will peel less. But you can do a single layer of one and a single layer of another. Generally, the highest we recommend is 3 layers of one and 3 layers of another. But we can save that protocol for another time. We actually have an entire webinar that we do on just peeling. We've taught classes for a full day on peeling and peel certification. But clearly, we've gotten some fantastic results, and has everything to do with the composition of what we're using here. Okay, so that brings us to wrapping up on the pigmentation section. We covered it very thoroughly, and you know, we appreciate that. We're going to move on to acne here, but Caitlin, do we have any other questions on pigment before we move on to acne?
We've got tons of questions that are coming in, and again, we're trying to get them. I'm trying to answer them as quickly as possible in the chat section.
Right. You keep working on answering the chat section, so that we can get through as much of the material as we can. We've got 45 minutes for what we have allocated for today, but I think we'll go significantly longer. We'll probably go for at least another 30 to 40 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe even a little bit longer for today, if people have the time for available. And again, we are recording this, so people can always jump on and come back a little bit later if we need them to. Okay, let's move on to acne. Georgia, you want to just follow me on the slides again? So acne, we're going to get the broad strokes on acne and then talk a little bit about the treatment options that we have available, because acne is, again, it's another very, very wide condition as far as who gets it, when they get it, how to treat it as far as the opinions go are pretty broad as well. But one thing we know is that we can treat it relatively easily. Right, there are a lot of options that are out there, but we can treat acne. What we want to talk about today is how we get it, where it comes from, what are the different sources, and give you a couple different options that are available. So when we look at the anatomy of an acne lesion, and I can't use a pointer here, and I can't show you what I'm pointing to, but if you look at that cross section that's on the bottom, this is one of my favorite slides. This is one of my favorite diagrams, because it shows the anatomy of an acne lesion and everything that actually contributes to the formation of an acne lesion. When you look at the different sections here, the epidermis versus the dermis, you can see the basal layer. And we talked a lot about the basal layer and its role in pigmentation, and how the cells are constantly dividing, moving to the surface, and that those keratinocytes are accumulating melanin as they move towards the surface. But the basal layer goes all the way down underneath the hair bulb. And those cells, while most of them end up going to the surface, because the basal layer goes underneath the hair bulb, a lot of those cells are desquamating inside the follicle. And that's okay, because that's part of normal follicular desquamation and metabolism, but it's usually around puberty when we start to see more sebaceous activity, right? The pituitary glands are being overstimulated. There's more hormonal activity. The sebaceous glands are starting to produce more material, more sebaceous material. It's pumping additional sebum inside the follicle, and it's pushing that cellular debris to the surface faster. It becomes more sticky, and when it gets to the surface of the opening of the follicle is on an angle, right? It's called the infundibulum, which means funnel, and that's an area of perfect accumulation for cellular debris. And once it rolls over, right, there's nowhere for that cellular debris to go. So the sebaceous follicles sebaceous glands are still going to be pumping sebum inside the follicle. Those cells are still going to be shedding and desquamating, but it's the P. acne that are there normally inside the follicle that are going to see that sebum as an additional food source. And when the the P. acne start breaking down the sebum itself is actually primarily comprised of triglycerides. So the sebum is broken down by the P. acne into fatty acids and glycerol, and it's the fatty acids that start to irritate the inner lining of the wall. So all that pressure that's built up from all that activity that's going on, you know, when you look at, you know, grade 3, grade 4 acne, it creates the rupture and the inflammation underneath the surface of the skin. It's also a perfect example of all the classic signs of inflammation: redness, heat, pain, swelling, loss of function along the lines. But really all those things that lead to the acne formation, you can actually see working here. Not to mention the fact that those cells that are desquamating into the follicle, they're going to be seen now as antigens or something that the body needs to wall off. So now you've also got white blood cells coming to that area to fight that. So you've got all this stuff going on inside this follicle, and that's what we really see when we see the formation of these larger inflammatory acne lesions. So the question becomes, what can we actually do about it? We're not really talking a whole lot about, all of the factors involved in the sources of where it comes from. There's a lot of other factors we can talk about. We could talk about diet. We're not going to talk about diet. Dietary certainly it's definitely an influential factor, but we're not going to go into that. But there's certainly a lot of hormonal activity, the precursors, the enzymes that actually convert the precursors of the hormones that lead to overactive sebaceous glands. But we're really going to talk about primarily the options. Reducing inflammation is big, because if you can reduce inflammation, it can actually reduce the potential to create hyperpigmentation. And we talked about this briefly when we discussed pigment. It's the darker spot that lasts, especially in a darker Fitzpatrick type of 3, 4, 5, 6. The pigmentation spot sticks around for much longer than the actual active acne lesion. So by reducing inflammation, you reduce the impact of having that dark spot around for a long period of time. So reducing inflammation is key. Normalizing desquamation, or the shedding that you see inside the follicle, that's also very important, because if you can do that, it keeps the opening of the follicle clear, and there's more oxygen that's inside the follicle, and it can actually reduce the overall bacteria content. Reducing the bacterial content, specifically the P. acne bacteria inside the follicle, is good. We have healthy bacteria on the surface of the skin. We also have pathogenic bacteria on the surface of the skin, and the notion of having the microbiome is something that was introduced, or at least the discussion was introduced on skin microbiome not that long ago. I first heard about it from a lecture when I was in with Rebecca James Gadbury several years ago, but it's now really gaining a lot of momentum in the industry. We've been utilizing ingredient technology that's relatable to the microbiome, that helps to promote what are called B defensins. And B defensins are naturally found antimicrobials that help to control bacteria on the surface of the skin, or pathogenic bacteria. It helps to promote healthy bacteria, but also keeps the bad bacteria at bay. So it's something that we've been talking about and discussing for quite some time, but now you have the idea of probiotic and prebiotic ingredients that are making their way into professional skincare. And there's just a word of precaution to be careful, because some of the probiotics that end up into skincare products, if they're using preservatives, they end up killing the preservatives. Will end up having to kill the probiotics. So we'll save that discussion for another day. Promote healing, especially if you have larger inflammatory lesions. If you have someone who's doing home extractions, that's an issue. So anything that's in a product that can actually help to promote healing is going to be beneficial. Certainly slowing sebaceous activities, and we have ingredients like 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. Azelaic acid is one. Regucib is another ingredient that's been shown to do that. What these are doing is these are slowing the conversions of the pre-androgens that are ultimately creating more sebum. And there's only a handful of these type of ingredients that are available in the industry, but they are definitely effective when combined with some of the other ingredient technology that we've mentioned. And of course, eliminating and controlling follicle congestion. Get what's impacted inside the follicle out into the surface, but doing it responsibly. Doing it in a way that's not creating more harm than good. And certainly hoping that the clients are not doing extraction and picking at home. It's something that we want to certainly encourage now, especially when we have so many of our clients that are not capable or able to get in to see us and see the estheticians. Any questions on any of that we've covered so far, Caitlin?
Before we get to the questions, I did just want to mention one thing. So one thing, whenever you're treating an acne client, there's really no two acne cases are going to be the same. So what you have to, the very first thing that you want to take in consideration when you're going to put your acne client on a treatment regimen or a treatment plan is going to be the amount of inflammation that's associated with that client. That's going to be on there as well. You'll utilize inflammation to dictate your treatment rooms, but also their retail regimen. So earlier we discussed how aging and also pigmentation kind of go hand in hand. The other two categories that go hand in hand as well is going to be your acne and also your sensitive kind of category as well. A lot of the times for my clientele, if I do see a lot of inflammation in their skin, I may put them on Circadia's Chronocalm first because that does have a lot of anti-inflammatories, calming type of ingredients. I'll put them on topical anti-inflammatories before I even start to address the bacteria, start to remove any type of any keratinocytes, anything like that, because I want to address inflammation as the #1 thing first.
Awesome. Thank you, George. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Caitlin, did we have questions coming in this category?
We do, yes. So we've got quite a few questions coming in still, and I just might be that I'm that far behind, about the Mandela Clear and how to treat with our whole peel system, our gel peels versus our ethanol-based peels. So I think that next Wednesday's webinar, we'll just do our 5 Ps of peeling, and you'll be able to log in and we can spend a lot of time really focusing in on the different peels that Circadia offers and the differences between each peel. That will also go into pre-treating. We've got a lot of questions on pre-treat, also on different post-care products as well. So all of that will be in our next webinar. So if you aren't getting your questions answered or if you want more information, tune in to next week on Wednesday.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, so we'll save those for then. Anything specific on the, let me just touch real briefly on the difference between the peels, because I think that's important now. So there is a distinction in some of the peels, which I think we'll get to, but you have traditional ethanol-based peels, which is what the Mandela Clear is and what the Jesner is. If the Jesner itself is not in ethanol, it's not a true Jesner peel. It is a modified Jesner. But ours is. The Mandela Clear also is, but we have another category of peels that are in a gel base. So the main difference, of course, is that ethanol it's a relatively high penetrating material. It will penetrate the sebaceous follicle quickly. Anything that's dissolved in it, in particular the alpha and beta hydroxy acids that we use, will penetrate into the follicle. It breaks down multiple layers of stratum corneum, multiple proteins quickly. And in general, they're self-neutralizing. Not always, but in general, they're self-neutralizing. So you'll start to see that skin peel in relatively short order, and that's what they're designed to do. Whereas the gel-based peels, and not all brands are the same, so don't take what I say for another brand the same way. But gel-based peels are usually a larger molecule base, and they're designed to suspend the active ingredients, suspend those acids at the surface of the skin and break down protein layer by layer by layer. So two very stark differences in the function of what those peels are supposed to do. Ethanol-based peels will almost always penetrate quickly, where the purpose of a gel-based peel, at least for the Circadia brand, is designed to suspend the acid at the surface and very, very slowly break down the protein. So pretty active ethanol-based peels, lots of peeling or significant peeling at least for most of them, whereas the gel-based peels offer a lot more control for the esthetician. They have to be neutralized, but there's also a lot more comfort associated with those two. They both have their purposes, but we'll cover that, as Caitlin mentioned, in the Wednesday webinar next week on peels.
Another quick question, sorry to interrupt. Another question that we've been getting quite frequently is, people are trying to keep up with the questions and also be listening to you, Michael. So we will try and compile all of the questions in a spreadsheet that we will attach to the email that we follow up on. And then we have quite a few questions coming in referring to the original before and after picture on hot yoga, and if she stopped doing hot yoga through her treatments. And yes, she did. She stopped hot yoga for the full 8 weeks. And when we look at long distance runners or ultra runners or people who are working out for a long period of time, they are increasing the amount of ATP production that they're producing. And that's the energy, the universal currency of all of our cells as far as energy. But with ATP production also comes a free radical called superoxide. So that can accelerate the aging. And that's how we made the link between the hot yoga and with her accelerated aging. And then also just the heat and constantly being in that high heat, high humidity, or sweat really in the air, that can create more chronic inflammation over a long period of time. So we had that question come through quite a bit.
Okay. Okay, so I think we're ready to move into the product section when it comes to the acne treatments. And again, you know, results, this is another one where results may vary, and not everybody has the same product protocols, but these are things that we know that we've gotten some really great results with when it comes to treatment options. So the microexfoliating honey cleanser, not everybody's going to need something aggressive when it comes to treatment cleansing options. Salicylic is something that we use. Benzoyl peroxide is another option that's not available in the Circadia range, but the honey cleanser uses a very gentle surfactant. We're using a sulfate-free surfactant blend. We do have a manual exfoliant that's in here, but rather than things like pumice or the bane of every esthetician's existence, the St. Ives scrub, which is crushed nut shells. It's actually not even apricot shells, it's walnut if you look at the back of the label. But rather than using those materials, and of course polyethylene, which is the bits of plastic, those have been banned now for a couple of years. We're using actually an organic beeswax bead. So it's rigid enough that it's going to remove dead skin cells, stratum corneum cells, the way we want to scrub to without being too abrasive. So for an already inflammatory skin condition like acne, this is ideal. So if it's a type of condition where we don't want to use something like salicylic acid or even benzoyl peroxide, this is great. If it's producing oil, it will help to emulsify that oil, but help to keep the lipid barrier in contact to the degree where we don't want to be overly stripping the skin. And it's a fantastic option. And this is our most popular cleanser. Again, very versatile. Just like the Amandol milk cleanser, it has a lot of applications and a lot of places where it can be utilized. But certainly, acne is one of them. The Amandol milk cleanser, that too is certainly an option. We find that to be most effective for treating adult acne, especially those that have our darker Fitzpatrick types that have more challenges with the pigmentation rather than the active acne. We've gotten some really good results in having reports from our clients that this is a fantastic treatment option. So there are a couple different ways to utilize that. The salicylic acid cleansing gel is one that we find to be most effective for the higher levels of acne, grade 2, 3, and borderline 3 into 4, because it is a 2% salicylic acid. So it's a reagent grade salicylic acid, meaning it has a very high purity. There's different levels of salicylic acid that can be purchased as a manufacturer for raw material, but we're using a relatively high purity. So this is going to be different from a 2.5% salicylic acid that you may be purchasing from a drugstore, in that it may be a little bit more active. And it's one of the reasons why this only comes in a 4 ounce rather than in an 8 ounce, right? So it's not designed to be used every day. And when we put this in the hands of someone that's using it every day, sometimes they come back and say, well, my skin is red and I'm feeling very dry. Well, it's because they're overusing the product. Most of the time, if we recommend that they use it just a couple, 2, 3, maybe 4 times a week, they get a relatively good clearance rate with this and the rest of the home care regimen that we're recommending. But if they overuse it, they're going to start to see that problem. And it's not that they're having a reaction to the product. It's the salicylic acid, being a beta hydroxy, being lipophilic, oil soluble, it's breaking down the surface protein. It's doing what salicylic acid is supposed to do. It's just being applied too frequently. So a little bit more conservative, start slow, and then ultimately build up with this. But it is certainly a powerful tool for those mid-grade levels, mid to high-grade levels of acne, and also can be used in the professional treatment room. Caitlin, anything to add to that?
I mean, just for my skin in particular, I'm relatively sensitive. So if I overuse the cleansing gel with sal, if I use it more than 3 days in a row, it does make me peel. But I feel like it's salicylic acid is always discussed as being a great treatment for acne, but we always forget that it can be really beneficial for age management as well. So if you're looking for more of an aggressive cleanser for your anti-aging client, incorporating the cleansing gel with sal a couple days a week can also be a good benefit.
One of the other comments that I wanted to make is you may have clients that will use this that are producing high volumes of oil. If you have someone who's extremely oily, but not necessarily acneic, because again, it is lipophilic, it will, even though it's a large molecule, it will penetrate the sebaceous follicle, it will emulsify the oil. they don't necessarily have to have acne in order for them to take advantage of this and for this to be something that they can use at home. Lots of oil, not necessarily acneic. This could be a good option, so something they may want to try. Now, the white willow and juniper clearing mist, this is one that's a great option, fantastic option. We find that a lot of youth athletes, football players, we have some clients that treat almost exclusively youth athletes, and they use this, they get the breakouts around the helmet, and this really helps to address and helps to clear that. A lot of the extracts, as you might imagine, white willow, juniper, these are classic extracts for helping to keep be anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, some natural salicylic acid sources that are here, and really overall in general clearing. Just spray a little bit. Getting teenagers to be and young adults to be consistent can be a challenge, but when they know it's easy and it's an easy application, this is something that really has a tendency to work well. The daytime control, I'm actually going to jump to the nighttime control first, and then come back to the daytime control. So George, let's do that. Let's talk about the nighttime control. I mentioned benzoyl peroxide in a cleanser. We don't have that option, but we do have the nighttime control as a benzoyl peroxide at a 5%. And one of the reasons why we limit it to a 5% is because benzoyl peroxide, it's definitely one of the best bug killers that we have when it comes to controlling P. acne bacteria, but it is a relatively large molecule. And that can be very irritating, especially, again, if you're using certain types. We're using a form that is relatively, it's better to work with because it's a smaller molecule. It's actually encapsulated in a micronized form of BPL. And that means that it's going to penetrate into the follicle a little bit deeper where the P. acne bacteria is. And the encapsulation means that it's going to kill the bacteria over a longer period of time. Whereas standard benzoyl peroxide, when you put it on the skin, not only is it big, it's irritating, it only kills on contact. And once that benzoyl peroxide gets metabolized by the skin, it's done. And then the bacteria, the P. acne bacteria, begin to grow and proliferate again until you put more benzoyl peroxide. And that's one of the reasons why, products that you may find online or from the drugstore, they work for a little while and then they stop working. This form of benzoyl peroxide, it gets the condition under control faster because of that slow time release kill of the P. acne bacteria. So the idea here is that you can use less, you don't have to use it as long, and there's less of an irritation factor. Now, with that said, it's still benzoyl peroxide. It can still cause irritation. It can still bleach sheets of color. It still has all the potential downsides that you can have with benzoyl peroxide, but far less. When you see a lot of times, you see some scarring associated with acne, some of the high percentages of benzoyl peroxide and even salicylic acid, they will dry out a grade 3 and even a grade 4. And if you've got people that are at home picking, they're going to pick these off and they're going to end up with scars. I mean, I've seen people even in treatments and demonstrations that have been using 10, 15% of these high concentration materials as spot treatments, and they end up picking this off, and then they've got a scar. And as estheticians, there's really not much that we can do after that to get rid of it, especially if it's a cystic type of lesion. So keeping the percentage low is incredibly important, and having this particular form of benzoyl peroxide is a very powerful tool that we have at our disposal. And again, with that said, people shouldn't be on benzoyl peroxide for a very prolonged period of time. It should be used somewhat cyclically. That again is going to vary depending on the severity of the condition, depending on the individual that's seeking treatment from you. So just make sure that they have it as an option. But we're seeing it only 2 to 3, 4 maybe times a week is getting us a relatively good clearance rate.
Michael, if we could just back up for 1 minute and go back to the microexfoliating honey cleanser slide. We have a couple of questions regarding if we're responsibly sourcing our beeswax and how. And then we've got quite a few people who are saying that they have clients or even themselves are experiencing a little bit of either a breakout or it could be potentially pore clogging. If you wouldn't mind addressing that before we move on.
Yeah, sure. We have one supplier that we get the beeswax from, And we do have some certifications that we could potentially share with them. I'll get some of the documentation together and we can share that later. It is definitely responsibly sourced. We do our best to do that and to make sure that we are doing that with all of our materials. And as far as the pore clogging, when it comes to that, if you actually start to use the product aggressively, you'll start to feel the bead dissipate. There is a skin conditioning element to that. So if you're overusing it, there is a potential possibility, but it is rare that we've actually gotten reports that anybody has had issues. I mean, we sell more of the honey cleanser than we do any of the other cleansers. So again, everybody's skin's different. It can potentially happen, but I would guess that it's probably relatively rare. And for those of you that are having that issue, we'd love to connect with you individually and just kind of talk to you a little bit about that and see if we can get to the bottom of it. There may be something else going on that you're using, or if you're using a couple things together, it could be potentially causing a cross reaction, cross issue. But you know, we can certainly talk you through that and work through that. Okay. All right, let's move on to the daytime control. So when it comes to acne medications, benzoyl peroxide, salicylic acid, those are the two that stand out, but we really wanted to have something that didn't have any, quote, acne medication in it that could help to treat the acne. So we, again, put something together in the daytime control that had at least one ingredient that would help to address all those parameters that I discussed that form an acne lesion in the first place. So anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, helps to control oil. The niacinamide, of course, is the one that we've mentioned a few times. So that is an anti-inflammatory. It's used in a lot of products, a lot of brands out there as an anti-inflammatory, but again, helps to reduce pigment. So no matter what, if you're dealing with acne, chances are you're seeing hyperpigmentation as well. So this is for every day. This should be used every day underneath an SPF, no matter what the severity of the condition is, whether it's grade 1 all the way up to grade 3. I have to say, you know, if you are seeing a grade 4, you should refer. But even a grade 4, sometimes you can recommend, hey, this might be a moisturizer that you should be trying, not treating. But the niacinamide will help to control inflammation no matter what the condition. And of course, the pigment is something that we're all struggling with post acne lesion healing. So certainly that is showing some very, very promising results for just about everybody. The Regucib is something that I mentioned. It's a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. And what that is, again, that's helping to stop the conversion of precursors that ultimately lead to the sebaceous gland producing more sebum. So it's essentially cutting off the P. acne bacteria's food supply. If we do that, there's less fatty acids to irritate the inner lining of the follicle wall. So again, a little bit more of a preventative measure, but certainly contributing overall to helping to stop the condition or slow the progression. Bodifensine is that peptide that I mentioned. This helps to promote the growth of those naturally occurring antimicrobial peptides on the surface of the skin. So it's helping to promote healthy bacteria, but also to reduce pathogenic bacteria on the surface. So that's something that's not necessarily new when it comes to microbiome. And it's not a prebiotic or a probiotic, but it's helping to promote healthy bacteria on the surface of the skin. Gram Active is another ingredient that's been shown to actually reduce P. acne bacteria in the follicle, similar to the way that benzoyl peroxide does without actually being a benzoyl peroxide. And then the Canadian willow herb extract inhibits P. acne, as well as the lilac stem cell extract, also anti-inflammatory and fights P. acne bacteria. So again, very comprehensive formulation that you're seeing here for addressing most of the signs that ultimately form an acne lesion. So you've got a whole system here together that are really helping to fight the formation of an acne lesion and treat the condition as a whole. Now, the last one in the system that we'll talk about for at-home care is going to be the Spot Stop. And I can't tell you what an amazing product this is, how effective this is as a tool for not just at-home use, but also in the treatment room as well. This is going to help to reduce visible redness almost instantly. There's a number of things in here that are going to control inflammation. And again, this goes back to the idea that if you are not using salicylic or benzoyl peroxide to treat the inflammation, you need something that's going to help to control those large inflammatory lesions from getting so large that they will create hyperpigmentation. So everything here is designed to get those larger lesions from becoming a grade 1 to a grade 2, a grade 2 into a grade 3. So getting it before it creates hyperpigmentation and scarring and all types of other issues. This is what this is designed to do. If you're doing extractions in the treatment room and you've had to get a little bit aggressive, you can put this on the treatment area and it really helps to shrink down that redness almost immediately. And no one wants to send someone out into the waiting area after they've done extractions with all these red spots. So this is really not just a great tool to use at home to control the progression of acne, but also a great tool to use in the treatment room after you've had to do the extractions. Really fantastic tool. I mean, you can literally see the redness dissipate after just a few minutes, almost completely gone. These are very powerful in many ways vasoconstrictors. I mean, there were some ingredients at one point that we had to take out of here. Some of you may remember Fen-Phen, which was a diet supplement that had vasoconstrictors in it. So effective that it was actually giving people heart attacks. But if you would put it on the skin, you could literally see a dot of redness completely disappear. So that's no longer available, but we found some other alternatives that we replaced it with. Once they removed it from the dietary supplement industry, they removed it from the cosmetic industry as well. But we changed the formula a long time ago, but it's more effective now than it was even back then. But incredible formulation, and we get so many great responses from our clients that after extraction, how effective it is for them after they've sent their clients back into the treatment room, from the treatment room, how much redness is dissipated after the extraction.
Michael, would you suggest that with the ingredient profile of the Spot Stop that it could be used on pregnant and nursing clients?
Yes, I would say more than likely yes. Let me hold off on that, only because there is a derivative of salicylic acid. I want to double check the triquinol plus and just make sure that it is not on one of our, because I don't have our pregnancy list. There is a list of products that we do not recommend. And maybe Caitlin, you can check with Susie and regulatory while we're doing the webinar. But I do want to say yes. I know there's a salicylic derivative, triquinol plus, but I don't think off the top of my head that that's one that is restricted.
Okay, I can definitely check in on that. And then any recommendations for Melia?
Melia is a tough one. I mean, that's really hard. I mean, you can peel it. Most people, the most effective treatment that I've seen and the way to dealing with it is lancing, but not everyone can lance depending on which state they're in. In fact, at this point, most states can't lance. But it is probably one of the hardest things to treat topically. There really aren't a lot of good options.
Okay, and then there was a couple of questions that came in again about the order of application for the acne products, and then if there's a difference in treatments for hormonal acne versus more bacterial acne.
Sure. So let me address the hormonal versus bacterial. I mean, really, when you look at it, all acne has hormonal roots, no matter what, whether it's teenage acne, whether it's adolescent acne, whether it's adult acne, whether it's postmenopausal acne, there are hormonal factors that are playing into it. There's bacterial factors that are playing into it as well. It's just the degree of the bacteria that's playing into it. So that's the short answer to that question. So and it's not a one size fits all treatment. We're getting great results with the majority of the cases that we're dealing with here. And some will say yes, use benzoyl peroxide, use mandelic acid, use vitamin A. We kind of have a tendency to shy away from the vitamin A because it creates a proliferative effect. And most conditions with vitamin A, you'll start to see a little bit more of a breakout. Some brands have done really well with that philosophy. Dr. Fulton and I actually had, for some of my props when the camera was working in the beginning of the presentation, he's someone that I spent quite a bit of time with early on in my career. I talked to him a lot about the treatment of acne and some suggestions. He and I talked about quite a few things, and I was fortunate enough to have him befriend me early on when I was getting started, and I have his book right in front of me, Acne RX, and I was fortunate enough to also have his signature in it too. So it's you know, a priceless memento that I have. But you know, he's one of the ones that pioneered the Fulton method, which is, you know, it's pretty aggressive for a lot of people, but if you stick with it, it can work for quite a few. So there's pros and cons to the different options that are out there and that are available. This is one that we have laid out. It works for a lot of people, but it's not going to work for everybody. Just with pigmentation, you know, just with acne. There's no silver bullet. There's no one answer. Anybody that tells you out there that they've got it completely figured out doesn't. That's not the case. So it's ever evolving, and we're constantly trying to improve and do whatever we can to bring in the technology that continuously becomes available. So that's the short answer to that. When it comes to the actual treatment options that are available. When it comes to order of application, certainly your cleansing, depending on the cleanser that is necessary. And again, depending on the individual, the honey cleanser may be the most appropriate option. It may be a combination of the honey cleanser or the salicylic cleanser or the amandilla milk cleanser, and we can certainly visit with and have everybody who's watching. Our customer service team is here. You're there to obviously answer questions, and we may be able to dig in a little bit deeper into that on another webinar. But it would be the cleansing option. It would then be the white willow and juniper clearing mist. The spot stop usually comes last, but the daytime control, of course, would go on, and then the SPF is always last for day application. In the evening, it would cleanse, mist, nighttime control, and then the spot stop.
Okay, wonderful. And I would also say that the spot stop, and as Michael was kind of talking to different hormonal changes and male dominant hormones, when we women go through our menstrual cycle, the latter part of the month, the 2 weeks prior to our menstrual cycle, where we have an increase in progesterone, that's usually when we start to see some of those really painful under the skin lesions that really never come to a head, but you are constantly feeling them. They are, very painful, and they can also turn very red. The spot stop is amazing for that because it does have a little bit of an analgesic effect to it. It can help to numb that area out so it doesn't feel like there's so much pressure. And then it also is great to prevent those from ever coming to a head or preventing them from getting so large that they are incredibly uncomfortable. So there was a lot of questions on how to use this in home care. Some of the times, if you do have somebody who has a higher grade acne, you can actually use this as a full face mask application. So you'd use it 3 times a week, full face, and leave it on the skin and sleep in it. Or if you wanted to use it on individual lesions, it can help to prevent the lesions from coming to a head, prevent secondary infections with those who are doing at-home extractions, which we all know our clients are doing behind our backs. If you do have them use the spot stop, it can help to prevent some of the bacteria spread from those home extractions. And again, it helps to numb the lesion out slightly, so hopefully they forget that it's there. So there's multiple usages for this for both professional and for home care. But it's such a versatile product that I feel like it's very underutilized by a lot of our professionals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we have some that once it's adopted into the home care and also into the treatment room, it's one of those things that people just can't live without. And those that have used it become huge fans, and they're purchasing it in huge quantities. So certainly give it a try. If you haven't used it already, I can promise you'll become a fan favorite relatively quickly. Okay, I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. We're getting close to the time when we said we were going to go, and we've got a lot of time left. So I want to keep things moving, but I also want to get all the way through the material. So Caleb, we're gonna keep going all the way to the end here. So we'll just keep going. Sound good?
Yes, I think that sounds great. And again, if people need to jump off, we understand that you've got plans. We are recording this, and we will send out all the information.
For those of you that do have to jump off, we make sure you come back to the recording if you need to, because we do have some packages that we are going to be offering. We've been talking about our staycation bundle, which is something that we're shipping directly to. It's a at-home treatment. It's an at-home facial that we're offering at no charge that we're sending directly to your clients. So you're placing your order with us. as you normally would. You're charging your client as you normally would, even if it's just a regular cleanser or a combination of the products that we've been talking about. But we're going to include the at-home facial. That's the caviar lime and passion fruit enzyme mask, the marshmallow whip hydrating mask, the lipid cleanser, the vitamin C, a brush, a headband, everything that they need to make sure that they feel like they're getting the service that you would be providing at home for themselves until they can get in to see you, while so many of our businesses are closing and we're all experiencing this together. So make sure you do that. We've also partnered up with Lightstem and Well Products for a webinar tomorrow. That's going to be going on at 1 Eastern time. So if you're not already signed up for that and you'd like to attend, please make sure that you do that. And we've got a couple bundles that we put together with our friends over at Lightstem already for an acne bundle that is for home care, and also for a wrinkle bundle for home care with a few products. So if you don't get a chance to stick on the webinar today, make sure that you come back for the recording and take a look at those. There are some deep discounts that our friends at Lightstem and I have come up with together, my team have come up with together to be able to offer for your clients for drop ship specifically. So for those of you that have to jump off, thank you so much for joining us. But we're going to keep going here to make sure that we get all the material recorded today. Okay, let's move on to the Oxygen RX. So the Oxygen is our most popular treatment. We provide more oxygen treatments to our professional spas and skincare professionals all around the country, all around the globe, than we do anything else. And it's because it's the most versatile treatment that we have to offer. It really is the epitome of a deep pore cleansing service, but it's fantastic for the treatment of acne. It helps to control bacteria, helps to control vascularity, redness, any kind of skin condition with redness, whether it be rosacea, compromised barrier. It's helping to control bacteria as well. And what we have here is a powder, an oxygen powder that we mix with a gel base. And once that's on the skin, we're able to use enzymes, a spray enzyme that can actually be converting that material to oxygen and water on the surface of the skin. So really unique to the industry. There's no investment in equipment. What we find is that obviously the skin is a barrier. It's very difficult to get oxygen and other gases into the skin. The skin is designed to keep oxygen and other gases out. So there needs to be a really good delivery system for that. Hydrogen peroxide is one of the things that has been marketed in the industry for a long time as an oxygen treatment, and that could be considered to be oxygen, but hydrogen peroxide, unfortunately, isn't exactly great for the skin for regular application. It can be metabolized to one of the family of reactive oxygen species, the hydroxyl radical, which creates a lot of damage. So there's been some controversy on that. There's also some literature published on the long-term damage of regular use of hydrogen peroxide on the skin, even in open wounds. So you can have a look at that. But what we're using here is relatively minimal amount of what's called magnesium peroxide and creating oxygen on the surface of the skin. So it's called generation in situ. And as I mentioned, it really helps to get the congestion that's inside the follicle and the cellular debris that may be inside the follicle to the surface. So again, really ideal for acne treatment, but just about everybody's skin just looks fantastic afterwards. I mean, it really gives this nice glow and gets all the cellular debris that may be found on the surface of the skin and inside the follicle to the surface. We oftentimes partner this with some other level of exfoliation. George, on the next slide, the cocoa enzyme is probably the number one go-to. All of our enzymes are a blend of bromelain, papain, and trypsin. Bromelain, of course, from pineapple, papain from papaya, and trypsin, which is a pancreatic enzyme. We use a bacterial engineered source so that we don't have any animal byproducts in any of our formulations or any of our products, rather, our enzymes. But we're also adding different additives. So in the cocoa enzyme, we're using Hershey's cocoa powder. It's anti-inflammatory. The raspberry enzyme has a raspberry seed powder, which has high levels of azelaic acid for treating hyperpigmentation. The zymase citrus powder, high in vitamin C. So all of them have additional additives for varying purposes, but the cocoa enzyme is probably the most favorite. The Hershey's powder actually smells like chocolate, and most of those spas that take it on campaign facial or the cocoa and oxygen mask, because it just looks so great and it feels great. It's a really good way and a clever way to market it. But they do go up in varying degrees of activity. So the cocoa is the most conservative. The raspberry is a little bit more active, and the citrus is the most active of the three. You measure the activity of peels and pH, but the activity of enzymes is just a little bit different. So depending on what condition you're treating or addressing, the cocoa is probably the safest one to start with because it is the most conservative, and because we're really looking at acne and oftentimes rosacea with utilizing the oxygen treatment, the cocoa is, as I mentioned, the go-to. So Caitlin's going to talk a little bit about the actual treatment and some of the before and afters that we have and some of the results that we're able to achieve by using the combination of the cocoa enzyme and the oxygen and even some of the other exfoliating treatment options that we have. So let's take a look at those.
Sure, and we have been getting quite a few questions, and I just want to address with Circadia, we don't have any minimum orders. So we have quite a few people on here, and this is your first exposure to Circadia, so welcome. We so appreciate you joining, and we don't have any minimum orders or minimum startup orders. So if you're looking to purchase just a couple of the products or treatments that you're interested in, feel free to email us. You can email me, or you can email us at info@circadia.com, and we can get you directed to one of our client care specialists, and they can get you set up with new account paperwork. So please feel free to do that. Now, with this particular client, and really with acne in general, you want to make sure that you're looking to see what is the number one thing you want to target first. And for her, we wanted to make sure that we were reducing as much inflammation as possible. So we started to treat her with our Chronocalm serum first, and we really wanted to err on the side of caution and not exacerbate the inflammation with more of the aggressive treatment options like chemical peels, and even with the nighttime control, which contains that unique benzoyl peroxide. So we started her off on anti-inflammatory products like the Chronocalm. We were incorporating the daytime control for all of its benefits that Michael just spoke about. And then we really went into an anti-inflammatory treatment regimen. So we were treating her every week, and consistency with acne is key. So for every comedone that you're seeing on the surface of the skin, there's hundreds of microcomedones underneath. So you don't want to just be spot treating in specific areas, especially with a client like her. You want to make sure you're treating all over. So we started her out the first week with a cocoa enzyme oxygen treatment. And then the second week was just an oxygen alone. And then you repeat that. So then you do a cocoa enzyme oxygen the next week, followed by just the oxygen the week after. So it's 4 weeks of being seen once a week, and you're going to alternate between cocoa enzyme oxygen and oxygen alone. And that really, really helped to reduce the inflammation, reduce the bacteria, start to reoxygenate the pores. So you're not working with an anaerobic environment. And then once those lesions started to heal, then you started to treat a little bit more aggressively with our alpha beta peels, and then moving eventually into our Mandeli Clear system. But you can notice too, especially because she is Asian, that there's a lot of post-inflammatory pigmentation. So looking at the first before picture, you can notice that there is a lot of redness. There's some active lesions as well, but some of the redness that you're seeing is that post-inflammatory pigmentation. So that's where the Mandeli Clear or the mandelic acid comes in, but also, and I'm sorry, that was used in the Australian superberry mask, not the peel at first, but the niacinamide in the daytime control. So if you're looking at this before and after picture versus the next one that will show you, George, if you want to click over. Oh, never mind. We usually have a second one in here, and it's somebody who is showing significant inflammation versus some of the post-inflammatory pigmentation you're seeing with the Asian clients. So icing can be something that you can do on a nightly basis, and that really, really helps to reduce some of the inflammation. So we highly suggest to ice if you're showing significant inflammation for any of your acne cases, and then really just staying diligent with your home care, starting with Chronocalm, incorporating daytime control, and then starting to incorporate spot stop, and then if needed, the nighttime control as well. Now with this before and after that you have in front of you, this is the benefit of our oxygen treatment. You're noticing that this is not a immediate before and then immediate after. This was actually quite a few weeks that we were treating with that same pattern of treating weekly, cocoa enzyme oxygen followed by just oxygen, and repeating that every week. So this was, I have to remember, but I'm thinking this was 4 to 6 weeks of treating in that rotation. In the after picture, you are seeing some vascularity in her neck area. So for the last treatment, we did the oxygen treatment followed by the firming peptide mask. And the firming peptide mask has wonderful detoxification properties to it. And Michael will address that when we get to the slide on the firming peptide mask. But the firming peptide mask is not just for anti-aging and glycation. It does have some real good benefits for somebody who has more of a toxicity to their skin. So if you're noticing in her before picture, she does show some of that pebbly congestion underneath the skin, and that's why the firming peptide mask was such a good added benefit for her.
Yeah, I mean, the results here are just incredible. And when we talk about oxygen topically, as I mentioned, it's difficult. So we really need a good delivery, and we have an incredible one, probably the best that you're going to find for a topical oxygen delivery. And again, the skin's just not designed to get oxygen into it. So you really need something that's going to help to penetrate it, but you don't want prolonged delivery either. When you look at the firming peptide mask, as Caitlin mentioned, what we're utilizing here mostly is albumin. And albumin is something that's been around for a long time. There's a lot of companies that use it, but when it's solubilized in a water-based solution, when it's applied to the surface of the skin, it'll dry and it'll create compression. And the compression creates what's called an oncotic effect. It's basically forcing the blood vessels to pump harder and pump the blood to the surface of the skin. And it's the hemoglobin molecule in the blood that's carrying the oxygen. And oxygen, of course, is a nutrient that every cell needs for cellular respiration, ATP production. But at the same time that hemoglobin molecule is bringing oxygen to the cell, it's carrying away carbon dioxide. So it's in essence, as Caitlin mentioned, it's delivering nutrients, but it's detoxifying. So while we're delivering oxygen to the surface of the skin topically, controlling bacteria, helping to eliminate congestion, all the things that the Oxygen RX treatment does, with the firming peptide, it's helping to pump oxygen to the surface of the skin and detoxify. So it's a really great 1-2 system, 1-2 whammy for the skin, and it really makes a dramatic improvement. And this is just one protocol. We've got, as Caitlin mentioned really briefly earlier, an advanced mixology that we utilize, and with the Circadia range, there's a lot of different options. You've got a lot of different tools in your tool belt. You've got a lot of different weapons in the arsenal that we have for addressing these different skin conditions. So if you're not getting certain results that you're looking for, we can pivot. You know, you can plateau sometimes with a certain protocol, and then we can add another layer of what it is that we're trying to achieve. So that's one of the things that we always are striving for, is when we get a result, how can we actually improve it? And this is a classic example of that. But really great options. So if you're watching this at home again, and you've got questions, keep them coming. I know the questions are still continuing to pour in here. And our customer service department is answering calls as we speak. So, you know, we'll continue to make sure that we're doing that.
Okay. One question that we've been getting frequently is if you can make a distinction between our topical oxygen in the form of magnesium peroxide versus sprays or nebulizers, and then also the difference between hydrogen peroxide and what we're using.
Sure. So the magnesium peroxide is actually a powder, and it's much more stable. It's inert until it's solubilized. The magnesium peroxide, the hydrogen peroxide rather, is once it's applied to the skin, it's almost immediately oxidizing. In our treatment specifically, we have the enzyme catalase that converts that magnesium peroxide to oxygen and water. But oxygen being a free radical, I mean, it actually is. Oxygen itself is a free radical. Even the oxygen that we're walking around breathing every day that's essential to life, it has one unpaired electron, and two actually, molecular oxygen. So any molecule that has one or more unpaired electrons is considered to be a free radical. So it's not necessarily something we want prolonged exposure to in high amounts of the skin, which is why we have a good system for neutralizing it as well topically. So it's very different than just putting it into a cream like we're seeing with hydrogen peroxide. So it is unique. There is really no comparison to it when it comes to treatment options that are available on the market. When it comes to pressurized O2 gas, again, I've looked at this, and to be perfectly honest, we've tested it. We have a device here at our lab that allows us to measure oxygen penetration into the skin, and we've looked at a few of these over the years, and there really isn't much when you just pressurize the gas onto the surface of the skin. And even with our oxygen treatment, it's limited. You know, it's limited. When you're making oxygen on the skin, quite a bit of it, when you're converting it, is going right up into the atmosphere. But there's enough that's making it into the skin where we want it to control bacterial content, to help to shrink down blood vessels, and give that a little bit of push and regenerative effect that we're looking for. But it is relatively small, and we want it to be that way. You don't want too much. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yes, that answers the question. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, which slide do you guys have up now? Is it the fermium peptide or is it the Australian superberry?
We have the fermium peptide slide up now, but I want to spend just a couple of minutes on this one really quick as far as the mixing of it. I know that's a lot of questions that do come in on mixing the fermium peptide. So just one quick little tip on it is right before, maybe like 5 minutes before you apply it to your client's skin and you are going to actually mix it, just put them both in the dish together, your activator and your liquid, leave it together for about 3 to 4 minutes. And then right before you apply it to your client's skin, use like a wooden applicator or a metal whisk. And as it's sitting in the dish beforehand, it's going to start to solubilize that powder, the activator, so it mixes a lot easier that way.
Excellent, George. Thank you for the tip.
All right, Michael, we're on the berry, the Australian superberry slide now.
Did we talk through the ingredient deck on the fermium peptide? I just want to go back to that very quickly.
All right, we're there.
For the fermium peptide mask, there are a couple peptides that we have in here. L-carnosine is one. It's probably the most widely used anti-glycation peptide, and we'll probably get to glycation here in just a few minutes when we start the aging section. Carnitine is a metabolic booster. It actually is something that allows, if you take it orally as a supplement, it will allow fatty acids to be shuttled into the mitochondria before sugars do. So that's something that a lot of people will take as a supplement for weight loss measures, but also very good for the skin. Beta glucan, something that's has been utilized for many years. In fact, my grandfather was the first person to do, way back in the early 80s, skin penetration test, and showed that that beta glucan can activate the Langerhans cells for cutaneous immune defenses. So that is really vital to overall skin health. When you get a sunburn, it actually kills the entire Langerhans cell, not the entire, but the vast majority of the Langerhans cell population for a long period of time. And Langerhans cells are really responsible for maintaining antiviral attacks. So that's something that really helps to maintain the health of the skin. And you find that in a lot of the home care products throughout the Circadia range too. Aspartic acid, glutamic acid, not to mention that there's a lot of naturally occurring amino acids and peptides found in the albumin itself. So really, again, powerhouse collection of ingredients for back bar treatment. In the Australian superberry mask, Caitlin mentioned this, again, lactic and mandelic acid, a little bit higher percentages than you're going to find in the home care products for the treatment of both acne and rosacea. Helps with the, sorry, not acne and rosacea, but acne specifically and pigmentation. The lactic acid as well in there. The ryeberry, pepperberry, and muntries. These are 3 berries that are indigenous to Australia, and they've been shown to actually increase the skin's own ability to produce hyaluronic acid. So even though hyaluronic acid is an ingredient that we use here in Circadia as an additive to a lot of our great serums and other products, it's produced by a lot of cells inside the skin. But these 3 blends will actually incite the body to produce its own hyaluronic acid, which is fantastic. Not to mention that it gives a very nice rich color and aroma to the product, and people can actually see it in even a little bit of a gommage texture. So for additional exfoliation, we found that a lot of our clients have started to massage it and gommage it into the skin. Caitlin, can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm sorry, the gommage for the Australian?
Yeah, like as a manual exfoliant, because you can feel a little bit of the texture of the berries in the product.
Yes, for sure. So, and if you want something that is going to feel a little bit more like a traditional gommage, if you actually mix equal parts of the Australian Superberry antioxidant mask with the Marshmallow Whip hydrating mask, the emollients in the Marshmallow Whip hydrating mask can actually give you a really nice gommage. And then the particles of the three berries, the pepperberry, ryeberry, and munchries, that gives a little bit of a boost of exfoliation as well. So that's a great combination for all skin types. And it can also help to cut the intensity of the lactic and mandelic acid when you mix both of them together. So that's a really great way to combine those. Now, if you also wanted to increase the level of activity of the Australian Superberry antioxidant mask, and part of our mixology course that again we'll be promoting here in the next couple of weeks, is to lay a thin layer of the lactic 30 peel underneath the Australian Superberry mask. Now, obviously you would not want to use hot towel or steam because it is using a peel underneath, and you do want to neutralize the peel like you would if you were doing just a standard lactic peel. But the extra boost of the lactic acid peel underneath the Australian Superberry can really give you a nice accelerated exfoliation. So, so many different ways to bump up or to decrease the activity level of our masks, but the granules of the berries can give a nice little boost in exfoliation if it's just used on its own when you're massaging.
All right, great. Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, we're going to move on to skin and aging section. If there's no other questions on the acne portion, again, we're given broad strokes here. One of my other props that I had to share with the audience is Dr. Mark Lee's Skincare Beyond Basics. I've known Dr. Mark Lee's, also Rebecca James Gadbury, someone else that I mentioned during the presentation. These are just incredible individuals that I met very early on in my career. I'm lucky enough to have met them very early on, and they've shared so much of their knowledge and wisdom and guidance and leadership, and quite a bit of what I've learned over the years has come from them. So just incredible resources and educational tools. So for those of you that are at home, that's definitely a book that I would recommend trying to get your hands on if you can. I know that Dr. Fulton's book, The Acne RX, has become incredibly scarce. I don't even know if you can buy it anymore. And another is Florence Barrett Hill's Cosmetic Chemistry and Skin Analysis text. I don't think that they're any print in any longer either, but I'm sure that all Dr. Mark Lees and Florence Barrett Hill will more than likely be hosting some online education here in the near future. And if they're not, maybe we can talk to them about doing some collaborations here as well. But this is a great time for everybody to be focusing on education while quite a few of our businesses are being affected by what's going on in the country right now with coronavirus. So I'll go ahead and move on. Caitlin, if there's any other pertinent questions that before we move on, I'd say we could probably keep this to the next maybe 30, 40 minutes if we can wrap up the skin and aging, which is obviously, again, a huge, very wide, very broad topic that we would normally spend a significantly larger time on. But we want to be respectful of everyone's time and move through the material today in short order.
Yes, and I would say a lot of the concepts in aging will also be addressed tomorrow in the webinar that we're doing with Lightstim. So, if you're ready for more education, we do have another webinar tomorrow. A lot of these concepts like epigenetics and inflammation, immune support, all of that will be addressed tomorrow. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'll send you the link, and I'll actually include the link for tomorrow's webinar in the follow-up email as well. So if you are just dying for more information on skin and aging, feel free to tune in.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Okay, so we'll move on to skin and aging. So obviously, when it comes to aging, so many of us know what it feels like, know what it looks like, but there really isn't a great definition of what aging is. What we have at this moment in time is a lot of theories and concepts when it comes to aging. And again, Rebecca emailed me a paper called The Hallmarks of Aging years ago. And it kind of directed me to say, okay, well, this is interesting, and I've read it many times over the years, but it's a collection of experts on these different theories of aging when you look at them, and the main theme is genomic instability, which is the breakdown in the integrity of the DNA structures. And when you start looking at some of the sub theories of mitochondrial dysfunction and telomere attrition and all the others that you see under glycation and all these things that are affecting aging as a whole, skin and body, we tie it back to the skin, right? These are all the ingredient technologies that are being promoted to us from the different manufacturers that are out there. And, you know, we really start to put 2 and 2 together. And no one, again, is going to be able to tell you and look at your face and say, well, that wrinkle's from this one's from sun, and this one's from diet, and this one's from stress, and this one's from oxidative damage, and this one's from glycation. This is a cumulative picture of aging as a whole, right? You can try and define aging as best you possibly can, but no one knows exactly why we're aging the way that we do. No one knows. I mean, anyone that figures that out has the Nobel Prize. But we can make some distinctions and some observations, especially when it comes to the skin. So if we look at the next slide there, what we're seeing are 2 images, top and bottom. We actually have an illustration, and then the bottom is 2 histological punch biopsies of someone who's 20 versus someone who is 65 on the bottom. So you can see the integrity of the dermal tissue is something that we measure quite a bit. Someone who's young and healthy, you're going to see a very cushy, buoyant dermal tissue. The dermis is primarily the connective tissue. There is almost 70% of collagen, and 1 to 2% elastin, I think, as I mentioned earlier. But you look at the difference in the color. On the right-hand side, you see all these dark spaces, dark spots. That's almost all ultraviolet damage and cross-linking of the connective tissue coming from all those sources that I talked about. But you also see these nice peaks and valleys, these nice ridges. You can see it more so on the illustration on the top, but we call those dermal papillae and ready pegs. And what that is it's a classic sign that the basal layer, the bottom layer of the epidermis, is turning over very rapidly, right? And again, young adults and teenagers, that's taking as few as 10 days, right? And what you see there along that dermal epidermal junction is a nice rigid connection, right? It gives the skin this nice tensile strength and buoyancy. The structural integrity comes from the dermis, but there's no movement there, so the skin snaps back. It's nice and healthy, and the rigidity comes from that from that connection. If you look at the mature side, it's flat. That base layer is completely flat, meaning that those epidermal cells aren't turning over very quickly. So that cell turnover cycle is now 30, 35, 40, 45 days as that individual begins to accumulate damage from all those sources, and the skin begins to wrinkle and become saggy and become affected. And what we see is and look at as aged, damaged skin. And you start to see that movement along the dermal epidermal junction. So these are all observations that we can make. You also see in a younger skin, a well-compacted, well-aligned stratum corneum. It's flexible, it reflects light. You don't see that as much. It's a thicker stratum corneum. It's dull. In a younger skin, you're going to see a more well-defined granular layer. You can actually count the individual layers. It's not so much in a mature skin. But what's really interesting about all of this is that you can actually take mature damaged skin and get it to sometimes look and behave like young healthy skin, even with simple technologies that have been here for many years with things like vitamin A. You take vitamin A in a stable form, whether it's retinoic acid, which is prescription, or retinol, which is an alcohol form. Whenever you see OL at the end of the vitamin, retinol, that's the alcohol form, or tocopherol, which is vitamin E, that's the alcohol form of the vitamin. Retinol, or any of the esters of vitamin A, whether it's retinol acetate, retinol palmitate, retinaldehyde is the aldehyde form. You can start to see those dermal papillae and ready pegs be restored, and that's because vitamin A is a cell proliferator. It speeds up the proliferative effect and shortens the amount of time it takes for those cells to divide and move towards the surface. So you see a pretty dramatic, quote, anti-aging effect just from something as simple as vitamin A that's been here for a very long time. Now, don't get me wrong, it's one of the most powerful tools that we still have in our arsenal, but there's been quite a few advances since the late 60s, early 70s, when it was first introduced as something that can improve the visible signs of aging. The point that I'm getting to is that we have a lot of things that have become available. We have a lot of options that we have to be able to not just reverse the visible signs of aging, but also prevent. As the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, about some of the mechanisms that create the signs that we see, but also about some of the things that we have to reverse and prevent. On the next slide, we actually see some of the things that create all of these issues. So we talk about extrinsic and intrinsic factors. Some of the big ones, of course, are ultraviolet exposure, free radical generation. Glycation is something that has become a big topic for us in professional skincare. My grandfather wrote a paper in 2008 on glycation. And I think it was probably the first paper that's ever been written on glycation for the skincare industry. And that was published in Skin Inc. magazine. And it's the most widely referenced skincare article on glycation in the industry. So even though it's not very well understood in the industry currently, people are starting to understand it a little bit more, and the general population is now being educated. You have beauty journals and direct-to-consumer magazines now talking about, the dietary intake and how diet is influencing our skin. And it has a lot to do with how the food is actually prepared. Everything that we eat has a certain amount of glycation, and foods that are cooked at higher temperatures, in particular foods that have high levels of protein and sugars in them together, have a much higher level of glycation. And the more that we consume them, the more they have this overall systemic effect on the cells and the outward appearance of the skin. So these are all things that we're taking into consideration now. Smoking, of course, we know is bad for us. Environmental cosmetics, pollution, especially in areas that have high traffic, New York City, Los Angeles, areas in Asia, not currently, but places that are high population that have a lot of traffic on the streets. There's actually, they're measuring particle sizes now that are actually getting into the skin, and they're interacting with the environment with ultraviolet light, and they're creating things like halogen pigmentation, halogen acne. So, and this is all relatively new. So our environment is having an impact on the skin, and then this is just being discovered now. So environmental cosmetics, the microbiome, there's a major tie-in here of all these factors together. So there's, again, not exactly a single answer, but we know it's a combination of all of these things together that are giving the outward visible sign of aging as we know it. Intrinsic factors like mitochondrial dysfunction and telomere attrition, as I mentioned, a lot of these are influenced by the behaviors like dietary intake and smoking, sun exposure, things of that nature. So we all have to just be responsible for what it is that we can do and can control these behaviors. When we talk about UVB specifically, UVB is one thing that I like to talk about in particular because it's sun exposure. This is one thing that we have to recommend. If there was a book on how to be an esthetician book, this would be on page 1, recommend a good sunscreen. So, I mean, you can debate all day long whether it's physical or whether it's chemical. There's reasons, rhyme and reason why you should use one versus the other. But as long as it's a good broad spectrum sunscreen, that's the most important thing to do. UVB is interesting because it has a very short wavelength. And that means that it has high energy. So the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy. But luckily for us, when you have a short wavelength, it doesn't penetrate as far. Right? UVA has a much longer wavelength, and it penetrates deeper into the skin. It'll actually penetrate into the dermis. But because of the high energy wavelength of UVB, it's capable of cross-linking DNA structures. It'll actually create what are called dimers in the skin and can potentially lead to mutations. So if you look at the next slide, this is the DNA helix. That high energy wavelength will create, if you look all the way to the right, those two yellow structures that are together, that's a dimer, right? And the skin has the ability to go in and fix that damage. You can actually create a repair system or an active repair system called excision repair. It goes in and takes that out once we've been exposed to ultraviolet radiation. But if it's a nice sunny day and you go outside and this happens, it's okay if it happens once, but if it happens the second time and then a third time and a fourth time, it begins to overwhelm the system. right? And the genomic instability that we're talking about is ultimately going to lead to dimers. Dimers lead to mutations. Mutations lead to carcinoma. So whether it's basal cell carcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma, these are the things that we're concerning ourselves when it comes to overall damage. So again, it's a high level type of discussion that we're talking about, but it leads back to something simple that we're recommending on a daily basis, which is wear sunscreen. UVA is something that we can actually see. We can see the accumulation of UVA damage. As I mentioned, it's hard to isolate, which wrinkle or which damage is coming from where, but certainly UVA accounts for a large portion of the visible signs of aging that we see. So UVA is most closely associated with aging. We call it the UV aging ray. UVB is the UV burn ray, or UV basal cell carcinoma ray, as I like to refer to it. But the next slide actually shows two twins, and this is a series of studies that was done by Dr. Antel. He actually showed a number of twin studies that were done. One that was, this group was obviously done with sun exposure, one that was exposed to sun, one that was not. Two twins, one that was a smoker, one that wasn't, one that had higher caloric intake, the other one that did not. But clearly with this one, a very stark contrast between the one that had a higher level of sun exposure and the other one that did not. So clearly we know that the sun has a major impact on that. And this is primarily UVA because it's penetrating into the skin and it's causing this very specific type of damage. Free radical damage is also something that we talk about a lot, and it's one of the reasons why we use antioxidants. So I just wanted to highlight this because I hear people all the time say, well, what does the free radical actually do? What's actually happening here? So I just wanted to take a minute to kind of do an overview, or maybe introduce it to some of you that are hearing it for the first time. A free radical is a molecule that has one or more unpaired electrons, and in nature electrons like to have pairs. They have to have a pair, and if they don't have one, they're going to go looking for one. And particularly susceptible is a lot of the structures of healthy cells inside the body and inside the skin. So when you have free radicals, and there's no shortage of sources of free radicals that we are confronted with in the environment. In fact, our body makes free radicals. As you're sitting there today, you're making energy, you're making ATP, like Caitlin mentioned earlier. But while you're making ATP, while you're making energy, you're also making free radicals. You're making superoxide, which is a very nasty free radical that's made by the mitochondria. But the body has a check and balance system in place that makes superoxide dismutase. Some of you may have heard of this as an active ingredient in skincare products. So the body does what it can to help to counterbalance some of this, but we fortify our vitamins and sometimes our food and certainly our skincare products with antioxidants to help to stabilize those unstable molecules. So things like vitamin C, vitamin E, a lot of the other ones, again, even some of the next generation ones that we've talked about, they're there to stabilize these unstable molecules. So when you look at the free radical theory of aging, it's really there to help to stabilize a lot of these unstable molecules that we see. There's a really interesting relationship, and we're going to talk about the vitamin C here in a moment, and we have a great video to show you that talks about the staying power of certain types of vitamin C in particular. But there's a great relationship between these antioxidants as well. Some of you may have heard the expression, or the phrase rather, that if you use vitamin E, you have to use vitamin C. Vitamin C is a water-soluble antioxidant, and most of the population now knows that vitamin C is good for them, not just as a supplement, but also as a skincare ingredient. And most brands will market a vitamin C. We're no different. Our vitamin C is our number one seller. It's a top-selling product for us. But vitamin E is also something that's good to use, but it is an oil-soluble antioxidant. When you're using vitamin E will find itself embedded in the membrane of most of the cells because it's oil soluble. So it gets into the skin and gets into the membrane of the cell, and it literally is the first line of defense of free radical attack. So when a free radical comes along, it will donate a portion of its structure to stabilize that free radical, right? And then it's taken care of. But unfortunately, that vitamin E then reverts to a compound called a quinone. Right, so it then becomes unstable, but vitamin C comes along and restabilizes vitamin E. So it has this very healthy relationship of recharging one another. And then vitamin C then becomes restabilized by other things like NADH and and so on and so on. But there is a synergy to using the two of them together. So this just something to keep in mind when it comes to additional education and why we're using the formulations the way that we do. Sometimes companies will combine the two together. Sometimes you'll find them simply applied in the protocol. You don't necessarily have to use vitamin C with vitamin E, but whenever you're using vitamin E, typically you'll find vitamin C together.
Something that's kind of interesting, because we were just talking about smoking and cigarettes in particular, but nowadays the vaping is so popular amongst teenagers, and some of the cases where teenagers or other people were having really bad reactions is because they were a vitamin E juice that goes into the vape pen. And
Right.
for the same exact reasons that Michael's talking about is the reason why they're having such adverse reactions to the vitamin E or to the vaping.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And in fact, there's one of the reasons why you're only supposed to take a certain amount, it's 200 international units a day of vitamin E, is if there's too much, it could actually be considered carcinogenic. If you're taking too much, if you're exceeding the recommended amount. Now, obviously, it's far and above the recommended amount, so there's not a ton of danger. If you're getting a little bit more than you're supposed to, but yeah, it could potentially be carcinogenic because of what's actually happening, because of the nature of that vitamin. So yeah, that's why like apparently what was happening is they were using the vitamin E as the filler for these vaping cartridges, and people were dying. So yeah, just another really great reason to avoid them in the first place. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about the vitamin C, and we've got a great demonstration video. I mean, this is, as I mentioned, a fantastic product. It's our best seller, and with good reason. So this vitamin C that we're using, it's magnesium ascorbyl phosphate, and you can think of it as ascorbic acid with magnesium and phosphate hooked to either end. Ascorbic acid is the form that's recognized by the body, more specifically L-ascorbic acid. And some companies will use L-ascorbic acid. The issue with it, of course, is that it is relatively unstable when it's in an aqueous solution or a water-based solution. And some brands have gotten around that by adding things to help to stabilize it, which can help. Or you can put it in a silicone-based solution. You still have to rely on the solubility and the hydration of the skin in order to make that effective. So there are some ways to use it, but if it becomes oxidized, if it's dark in color, if you're using a vitamin C that has fully oxidized, it becomes a little bit brown and then really brown, and then sometimes it turns completely black. It's no longer ascorbic acid. It actually reverts to a compound called dehydroascorbate. And then it's no longer an antioxidant, it actually becomes a pro-oxidant. So it can potentially be causing damage to the client's skin. So you really got to be careful with that and how long the product's been sitting around and on the shelf. So manufacturers know this, the ingredient suppliers know this. So to get around that, they started creating esters, and magnesium ascorbyl phosphate is one of them. Tetrahexadecyl ascorbate, which is one we've talked about, and all the others that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. But magnesium and phosphate, the reason why this works so well is that magnesium and phosphate account for some of the water solubles of the stratum corneum. So when you apply this to the slightly acidic pH of the skin, because this ingredient is most stable at about a pH of 7.2. When you apply this to the skin, which is of course slightly alkali, when you apply it to the skin, the magnesium and the phosphate are metabolized off, and they're used for other biosynthetic reaction. They're used for other things in the skin. And the ascorbic acid, basically is able to get right into the skin, and it gets around the issue of the instability. The other issue with ascorbic acid is that if it is stable, it usually is a relatively low pH, right? It's usually anywhere from 3.5 to 4. And if there's a compromised skin type, whether it's, rosacea or sometimes acne or any kind of contact dermatitis, psoriasis, anything where the skin's already compromised, that low pH can be somewhat irritating. And some of you may have experienced, hey, I'm using this vitamin C, but it's actually stinging my skin. And that's why it's a low pH. And it's those people that have those conditions that would benefit the most from a stable vitamin C that doesn't have an irritation factor to it. So this really helps to get around all that. We also are using a multiple weight hyaluronic acid. So it does all the things that you really do, including hydrate from the surface, but it plumps the mid layers of the skin, so that it gives that filling effect that you want hyaluronic acid to do, and it also works at the lower molecular weights to drive active ingredients into the skin. So this isn't anything new. There's a lot of brands now that have moved to multiple weight hyaluronic acid blends, and I think it makes for just even better product. I mean, in general, the standard molecular structure of hyaluronic acid is huge. It's a big molecule, and it sits on the surface of the skin and binds moisture. It'll pull moisture from the air and works as a humectant. But if there's no moisture in the air, if you're in a very dry, very arid climate, I mean, even here in the Northeastern Pennsylvania in the wintertime, there's not much relative humidity outside. And if you're in different parts of the country, if you're in Arizona where there's like single-digit humidity for most of the year, there's no moisture to pull from, so it just pulls from the moisture in the skin, and then it evaporates very quickly, so it can actually become an irritant. Hyaluronic acid as a cosmetic grade can actually irritate the skin significantly if you're not using different emollients at the surface to help to lock it in. So it just really makes for a great formulation when you've got multiple weights, and then on top of it you're using a good moisturizer. So this is just one of the best formulations that we've ever put together. It's not a very complex formulation, but it does make for an incredible product. And again, one of the reasons why it's our best seller. And vitamin C does so many great things for the skin. It's a skin lightener, a tyrosinase inhibitor, of course, a free radical scavenger, and it's a critical component to actually producing collagen. Right? We need to have vitamin C in order to stimulate collagen production in the dermis. Caitlin, did I miss anything?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay, I can't see the video, so I'm gonna have you guys play the video, and I'll just kind of walk through it.
Okay, we're gonna play it right now.
Okay, so this is a variation of a test that can be done with iodine. So this is kind of a deviation of the iodine test. So what we've done here is we've put some iodine in a beaker, and then we put some our vitamin C serum inside the beaker. And as you can see, as we add the vitamin C to the iodine solution, it starts to clear. So the iodine, it's not necessarily a free radical, but you can kind of think of the iodine as the skin being in contact with free radicals. So as it neutralizes the free radicals, that's where the clearing is occurring. But as you're adding the iodine to it, right, you're seeing additional iodine being added to the beaker. It represents the staying power that this has, the staying power of the vitamin C. So vitamin C, again, it's neutralizing the free radicals immediately on contact, but you have the staying power and the ability to continue to fight free radicals throughout the course of the day. And I mean, it's just really a telling demonstration that you can do. You can do this at home. So if you go to the drugstore, you get a couple drops of the iodine inside your beaker or even inside just a glass. You can show this to the clients. And it's because the iodine is capable of accepting a part of the structure very similar to the way that a free radical would. So it clears it almost immediately. If you're working with a vitamin C that you think, I wonder if this is stable, you can do the same thing at home. And you can just slowly add it. And it even works for other products that are supposed to work as free radical scavengers or antioxidant protections. You can just put a couple drops inside the iodine and see how long it actually takes to neutralize that iodine, but mostly for the vitamin C's. And we've tested some, and it's kind of shocking to see if they work or not. But we certainly encourage that, but it's very telling to see that ours works as quickly as it does. Caitlin, any questions on anything we've gotten so far?
Not most of the questions we have answered. We did have just one come in that is the test case for all forms of vitamin C, or is it just L-ascorbic acid, or in our case, magnesium ascorbyl phosphate?
Now say that again.
Can the iodine test be done on all forms of vitamin C? Is it just L-ascorbic acid and magnesium ascorbyl phosphate, or can we can it also be tested with like BVOSC or any other form of vitamin C?
You know, I've never tried to do it with BVOSC. I'm relatively certain with most of the water soluble forms, it'd be pretty easy. You know, I'd have to look into that, but I'm pretty sure you could. The issue, of course, is that if you mix, because BVOC is water soluble, if you put it into the water, it might not solubilize as quickly. But we'll have to get back to them on an answer with that. I've never tried to do that.
Okay. Another real nice visual that you can try for your clients is it's the standard apple, where you cut an apple in half and you treat one side of it with our vitamin C reversal serum, the other half is untreated, and you'll notice that the browning effect starts to happen significantly faster on the untreated side. So some of these visuals for your clients, it just makes a world of difference for them to see exactly how it's working, and it's a fun little way for you to do an experiment at home. Michael also talks a lot in the peel class about taking a raw egg and pouring either vinegar or a peel on top of it, and it really shows the denaturing properties of the acid. So again, just spending more time being little chemists in your kitchen, these are all things that you'll be able to do and even show your clients.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, so we're going to move to a couple of the products that we have that we highly recommend for your aging clientele. The sunscreen. I mean, you can't say it enough. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The Light Day Sunscreen SPF 37 next to the vitamin C is our best seller. We've got 3 sunscreens that are in here. Every one of the sunscreens that we utilize is approved for use internationally. Yes, they are 3 chemical screens. There's some controversy around them, but the biggest issue when it comes to sunscreens is that the fact that you're using something that's going to absorb the ultraviolet radiation and diffuse the energy as heat into the skin. And in order to get around that, we're using photostabilizers, the one that's there under the key ingredients, which is called Solistay. And what Solistay does is it helps, once the energy has been absorbed by the sunscreen, helps to reduce it back down to a ground state without releasing as much of that energy as heat into the skin. So for those that have had issues with chemical screens in the past, it helps to really cut down on that potential risk. We've also fortified this with some of those 2nd generation antioxidants. You can see that we're using things like Preventhelia and Lipochromin 6. These are things that are helping to protect against not just reactive oxygen species, a group that I mentioned that has some pretty nasty free radicals, but also reactive carbonyl, reactive nitrogen species. These are things that you don't hear a whole lot about in the skincare industry, but certainly are present, things that are either made by the body or that we come in contact with in our environment. And it is certainly a broad spectrum, so it's protecting against UVB and UVA. I can tell you right now that it's very difficult to reformulate. There are some restrictions currently with some of the ingredients that are currently approved when it comes to Hawaii and being reef safe, but physical screens as well. Up until recently, physical screens as far as particle sizes, there's still some restrictions for international use, but they're making it harder and harder for us to internationally make a universal sunscreen. But what I can tell you is this one is accepted in the vast majority of most countries where sunscreen technology is regulated, and it's become a fan favorite of product for most people that are okay with using what is referred to as chemical screens. I've gotten used to calling them chromophores because as soon as you say chemical screen, for many people it just automatically connotates something negative, and unfortunately that's just the mentality of the consumer these days. But I can tell you, it's not just a really great sun protection product, it's a great environmental protection product because of the antioxidants that we use here too.
Michael, we have some questions coming in about Solistay because it's a little bit more complex of a concept. Do you mind just repeating that once more?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to chemical screens in particular, they're inert until they are in the sun. So basically, until you put the sunscreen on, it's not doing anything. But as soon as you go out into the sun and the ultraviolet rays are hitting that sunscreen, they begin to absorb the ultraviolet radiation. But until that time, they're in what's called a ground state. But as soon as they begin absorbing the energy, they go up to what's called a singlet state. So from there, they're spinning at a very high energy orbit, and they're trying desperately to get rid of this energy. So the only place for them to go is down to very quickly the triplet state, and then that's when it dumps the heat off into the skin. But once that happens, it goes back down to the ground state again. So you can almost think of it almost like this little triangle. And again, no one can see me at this point, but ground state, singlet state, triplet state, and then it absorbs again. So you can almost think of a chemical screen as a sponge, right? As soon as it absorbs, it has to wring out, but then it can absorb again. But over time, just like any sponge, any good sponge, it's going to begin to break down, which is why the sunscreens ultimately start to deteriorate. What Solistay does is not only does it help the sunscreens to work more effectively over a longer period of time, it also cuts down on the potential of those photosensitive reactions. When people say I'm allergic to a sunscreen, most of them are not actually allergic to the sunscreen. They're having a reaction to the function of the sunscreen. They're having a reaction to how the sunscreen is working. I mean, people some people can be allergic to the actual sunscreen itself, and people can be allergic to just about anything. But it's really how the sunscreen is functioning. I've used all the sunscreens that we have here before and have had issues with it because of the photosensitivity that I have had. But with the Solistay added to it, it doesn't create that issue. It doesn't create that response in the skin. So it's really an incredible ingredient. It's been around for a long time. There's a gentleman by the name of Craig Bonda who I've gotten to know. He leads most of the time the sunscreen symposiums that are held in Florida just about every year. And he's written several papers on this concept. He introduced the technology many years ago, and you can actually find these. This was published in Cosmetics and Toiletries. For those of you that know Skin Inc. magazine, Skin Inc. magazine is owned by a company called Alured Publishing. Alured Publishing, Skin Inc. magazine is for the esthetician, but Alured Publishing also owns Cosmetics and Toiletries, and that is for formulators like myself and for the industry that makes products that we market to the skincare professionals. So that there was an article called "Quenching Excited State Molecules" that can be found that explains this entire technology. I mean, it's a lot of high-level quantum physics and things that will take a while to read through. And I've read it many times over the years, but it's fascinating how this technology works. And it's a little bit simpler, really broken down into an article called Photostability 101, which is a little bit more for not necessarily the consumer, but more for a skincare professional. But they're great reads, really good information. And it's Craig Bonda is the gentleman's name. Brilliant scientist. Okay, any other questions on that, Caitlin?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, we're gonna push off the nighttime repair. The vitamin Veil. I want to cover the nighttime repair, plus the boosting cream, and then I'm gonna have you talk about the age management, and then we'll talk about the bundles.
Sure.
And the staycation kit, because I know we're way over our allotted time for the day. Okay, so I talked a little bit about vitamin A earlier, and when it comes to vitamin A, the general rule is that you start with a low concentration and build up. So our lowest concentration is a 0.3% retinol acetate. Retinol acetate is one of the esters that I mentioned earlier. So retinol, again, is the alcohol form. So when you see retinol, an OL at the end of retinol, you know it's the alcohol form, just as with tocopherol is the alcohol form of vitamin E. To stabilize retinol, because it is relatively unstable by itself, you can put it in with an organic acid. So acetic acid is an organic acid. When you have palmitic acid, you've seen retinol palmitate, that's used in the cosmetic industry. Retinol propionate is propionic acid, and there's a couple others as well. So it stabilizes it and it makes it a little bit more tolerable for the skin as well. 0.3% is what we have here in this product, which is a relatively good place to start. You should always start with a lower concentration and get the skin acclimated and then build up. So what we have here is retinol acetate. We have matrixyl Syn 6, which is part of the matrixyl families. You have matrixyl, matrixyl 3000, matrixyl Syn 6, matrixyl morphomics is another. We're using all of them throughout the entire Circadia brand, but matrixyl Syn 6 is certainly one that helps to stimulate. It's not just collagen, but specifically collagen types 1, 3, and 4, which are the major structural collagens of the skin, dermal skin. And really, the two of these together are a powerhouse combination of ingredients. Ergothioneine is an ancillary antioxidant to vitamin C, really helps vitamin C to do all the things that it does even better. And then we've got, of course, the tetrahexadecyl ascorbate, which is the vitamin C that's oil soluble. So this is a cream, this is a lotion. So the combo here together is fantastic. You really have, again, another very comprehensive formulation that's going to treat multiple signs of aging. Helps to prevent, helps to protect, but the leader here is the vitamin A. Now with the Nighttime Repair Plus, you have a 0.5%. You have a 0.2 of an increase in the percent of the amount of vitamin A. So if you have a client that comes in, you want to get them, and you would consider them to be an aging clientele, you start them on the Nighttime Repair. Usually it lasts about 8 weeks if they're using a 2-ounce bottle and they're using it regularly in the evening. Get them through that. If you like what you're seeing, if they like what they're seeing, they're not reporting any kind of redness or flaking or breaking out, which can happen when it comes to vitamin A. I mean, some people just can't use it, and sometimes when they start using it, they get a little bit of flaking at times. Most people don't at that low concentrations, but some will. But if none of that occurs, then you move them up to the Nighttime Repair Plus. And if they do really well in the Nighttime Repair Plus and you're seeing great results, the next option would be the vitamin A boosting cream. Right? So the Nighttime Repair Plus, you want to keep them on that, and they're applying it after the cleansing and after they've applied their serums, face, neck, and décolleté. So they're applying this everywhere. Right? And then the next option will be the vitamin A boosting cream, where they're only going to spot treat. Now, the vitamin A boosting cream is a full 1%. So they're only going to apply this targeted areas, and they're going to build up 1 to 2 times a week, and then maybe up to 3-4 times a week at the most. And Kayla, maybe you can help me talk through this if there's any questions. So again, Nighttime Repair Plus, or sorry, Nighttime Repair, they're starting with this for 8 weeks until they complete the entire use of 1 bottle. Once they go through that and you're liking the results and they're liking the results that they're seeing, they can switch to the Nighttime Repair Plus. Once they've used the Nighttime Repair Plus, the next step to increase the activity would be the spot treat in target areas, whether it be on the forehead, around the eyes, if you're treating around the mouth, vertical lines around the mouth, keeping in mind that these are the areas of expression where we typically see wrinkles form. If you're doing neck and décolleté, you're spot treating over top of the Nighttime Repair Plus with these a couple times a week.
Right, and I think that we have been getting quite a few questions on age parameters for each of these products and when it's best to start treating and when preventative age management comes into play. And really what we suggest is again to be a little bit more conservative when you're first starting. If you overdo it with vitamin A, it's like taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So you're going to start to get a little bit of irritation from too much cell proliferation or at one time. So really starting off on the Nighttime Repair, even if you're in your 50s and you think that, oh, I'm more mature, I can start right away on the vitamin A boosting cream, or I can start right away on the Nighttime Repair Plus, we really suggest to use the Step Up program and really acclimate your skin to the percentage of vitamin A that you're using. In particular, if you have a client who's been using drugstore products, things that they're getting at Target or even at Sephora, some of the multi-level marketing skincare products that are out there, they're usually using a retinol palmitate or an ester form of vitamin A that has a very low percentage of actual retinol. And so if you boost them all the way up to the vitamin A boosting cream or even the Nighttime Repair Plus, they're going to see an adverse reaction, which might deter them from wanting to continue to use the product. So again, erring on the side of caution, really encouraging our client to utilize our Step Up program of the Nighttime Repair, then to the Plus, then possibly adding in the boosting cream. But keep in mind with the boosting cream, which is the slide you see up in front of you now, it has minimal ingredients in it compared to the Nighttime Repair and the Nighttime Repair Plus. Those are all over anti-aging products because they contain the meticulocin 6 peptide. They have all of the other great benefits of a well-rounded anti-aging product. So the vitamin A boosting cream isn't necessarily the best of the 3. It's just an added, as in the name, booster for you to add into your regimen. And if you're, and again, referring back to some of the questions we've gotten about more maintenance skincare products and things to be using in your early 20s to maintain the current skin that you have, vitamin A might not be the best option. Too much vitamin A on younger skin can create the same effects where you get a little bit of irritation, but we have products like our PhytoPep and even Revitacite that are vitamin A alternatives, also great for those who are pregnant or nursing. So we have different combinations that we can go through at a different time, but just knowing the difference between the different levels and really making sure you're taking advantage of using the Level Up and the Step Up program.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to cover the MileSite Plus, Caitlin, and I think it'll be time to discuss the drop ship and the packages that we've come up for everyone. Okay, the MileSite Plus. MileSite Plus is our product that is really effective for helping to reduce the depth of expression lines. I mentioned Matrixyl and Matrixyl 3000. This is a great combination of ingredients. We've been using these for quite some time, and these again are collagen boosters. They're peptides. They come from Sederma. They have an incredible amount of technology that we use in our formulations, but great technology in the industry all the way around. Keep in mind that wrinkles form perpendicular to the long axis of muscle contraction. So it's muscle contraction and the breakdown of the integrity of the dermis that will form a wrinkle in the first place. So the Matrixyl ingredients are designed to help to boost collagen, right? They're there to help to trigger collagen production. The SNAP8 and Inulin are two peptides that come from another company, Lipotech. And Lipotech, these help to reduce wrinkle depth by softening expression. So they're helping to inhibit the muscle contraction. So they're your topical Botox-like peptides. So by inhibiting or helping to inhibit the muscle contraction and then also stimulating collagen production, you're really addressing both mechanisms that form a wrinkle in the first place. And again, these are only designed to be used in expression areas, essentially anywhere that your clients are receiving Botox injections. These are going to go on the forehead, around the eyes, nasolabial folds, vertical lines around the mouth. You know, the frontalis muscle goes up, wrinkles form perpendicular to that area. Orbicularis oculi muscles run in circular fashion around the eyes and form crow's feet, so you're going to be applying them there. The orbicularis oris muscles that run around the mouth, those form little vertical lines up and down around the mouth, so you're going to be applying it there. A lot of the same spots that you're going to be applying the vitamin A boosting cream, and those two together really help to reduce visible signs and visible expression lines that they can see. So I know a lot of information there, a lot of information on what products can be used together, and those are all things that we can help and questions that we can answer from our customer service. So I know we went way over our allotted time. So for those of you that stuck around, and which I know is most of you, thank you so much. We truly appreciate it. I know the recordings are available, but I know we've got a lot of a couple of the packages that we have available, and we want to talk about our dropship program because I know most of you that are tuning in, you're at home. Many of your businesses are currently closed. You're working from home. You're staying in touch with your clients, and the whole purpose of this dropship program that we have now is to make sure that you can stay in touch with your clients. So you're reaching out to your clients and you're marketing these products just as you would as if they were coming in to visit with you. So you'll be placing your orders with us, but we're going to be drop shipping them directly to you. And George is going to show you the staycation kit that we've come up with, and that staycation kit is complimentary. So if you're placing a retail order with us, the staycation kit will come complimentary with the retail order. But then we've also got with Lightstem, our great friends over at Lightstem, a couple packages that we've made available. So Caitlin, if you would, why don't you take it away and show them these amazing packages that we've made available. But I want to say thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of this webinar. I know these are challenging times for everybody right now. We're in uncharted waters, but I know if we all stick together, we all work together, we know that we will get through this, and we're going to keep promoting education, keep promoting the opportunities for all of us to stay busy, to stay connected, and make sure that we can bring you as much information as we can possibly share to you through these uncharted times and stick together.
Thank you, Michael. So again, we want to reiterate that with Circadia, we've always backed our partners 100%. That's one of the main reasons why we don't sell direct to consumer, and we also don't allow for online sales. And during, again, these difficult times and uncharted waters, we really want to make sure that we are doubling down on our commitment to our partners. So that's where this dropship program really comes into play. And we wanted to expand this out to some of our other partners or vendor partners in the industry that we know have the same integrity and really are great partners for us just as vendors. So we have partnered with LightStim as well as Well CBD products. And what we're offering with LightStim is another dropship program with some really wonderful ways for you to increase your revenue. So what you're looking at here is our LightStim for Wrinkles bundle. This does contain the retail LED light. So this is the red light. And tomorrow's webinar, Amy, who's the director of education for LightStim, she goes into wonderful detail on the benefits of using red LED and how it works in the skin. And then we've actually combined that with 3 of our essentials products, which we just talked about: the microexfoliating honey cleanser, the vitamin C reversal serum, and the aquaporn hydrating cream. So we've discounted this over 25% to you as the provider, but we are also offering that we ship it complimentary directly to your customer. So you can use this graphic that you're seeing here. You can start to promote this at-home bundle to your clients, and our suggested retail price is $400 to the consumer. So you'll notice here that there's great margins for you. We're really helping to put the package together, get some nice revenue for you for retail, and then the convenience of not having your client leave the house. You don't have to leave the house, and we'll ship it directly to them. So this is a wonderful bundle. It's available starting today. We're going to have a little bit more detail on it on the webinar tomorrow. But again, just another way that we're helping to support our partners and really allow you to continue your retail sales as you're in this self-quarantine time that we're in right now. Now,
So
the next, go ahead.
Say that one more time. So they're getting free shipping on this, which is incredible. We're shipping it free. The discounted price to them for all this, the suggested retail price is $170.
So I'm sorry, the discounted price to the esthetician is $170, and that's over 25% off of the standard price for all of these products combined. The suggested retail price is $400 to your client. So we really wanted to build in a decent margin for you to be able to make some nice revenue and also make something really nice and powerful for your customer to purchase when we know they're going to get fantastic results from this bundle. So it's a win-win for everybody.
So the spa owners at home, for our clients that are at home, their clients can't get to them in the spa, but they've got great relationships. They know we've got this great special going on with LightStim. They can call their clients and let them know, hey, we've got a great special for you here. They can then market this to their clients, and their clients are going to get a drop shipped to them for free, and they'd be paying the $400 retail price.
Correct. Your customer is going to be paying the $400 retail, and then your price for your wholesale price for the bundle is only $170.
So the esthetician, we're going to be charging them the $170, but the client will pay the $400. Could they discount it? Could they discount it if they wanted to? If they wanted to offer, I mean, we're absorbing the shipping. If they wanted to sell it for a little bit less, if they wanted to, could they?
Yes, absolutely. This is just suggested retail pricing. We wanted to put it out there where you can optimize the potential revenue that you wanted to bring in. But again, if you want to offer discounts yourself, you can charge what you want. This is just our suggested pricing. But again, you're getting a 25% off, or more than 25% off of the wholesale pricing, resulting in that 170. So the SRP is something you can play with depending on what you think your clients will be able to afford at this time. But we wanted to put it out there as an SRP 400 because again, that's actually discounted a little bit. But if we wanted to give them the nice value, if you offer it for $350 or whatever, they can see that the perceived value is at least $400. And then again, we're offering free shipping.
Gotcha.
And then we do have a couple of questions regarding all of these specials. We'll be detailing these out in an email. We'll also be detailing them out in our webinar tomorrow. It's, there's multiple layers to this, so it's a little bit confusing, but we built these layers in very specifically to, again, support you as our partner. So we'll have another FAQ sheet that we'll put out for the LightStim Circadia partnership bundles, very similar to what we did with Staycation. So you'll be able to really understand the program and be able to promote it well to your clientele. We also can create these slides without pricing. We did get that question quite a bit. So this is just to promote it to you as the provider, but we do create social graphics that are consumer friendly, where it just kind of details out the benefits, and then you can add in your own pricing. So you'll have both of those options as graphics.
Okay,
and
great.
then the next bundle, this one is LightStim for Acne bundle. So this does contain the blue light for acne. And then we have included 3 of our more popular products for acne that we just talked about. So you'll have really good selling points when you're talking to your customers about the cleansing gel with salicylic, the spot stop, and the daytime control. So this is a discounted price of $132. And then the suggested retail for this to your client is $264. So this one's a little bit more affordable. We wanted to make sure that this was great for anyone who might be, having a teen acne. Maybe they're at home doing their online learning and they can hold the light up and they can do their anti-acne treatment while they're going through their online program. So this one is designed to be a little bit low of a price point for those teen acne cases, but still an incredible value to your client, but also a great way for you to make some extra revenue while you're forced to stay home and to temporarily shut the doors of your spa.
Right. I mean, that's a great price, and especially because they're no free shipping. That's incredible.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay, so we've detailed this program out. Michael has been going live on multiple platforms. He's also been sending out kind of a weekly update video, just letting everybody know what we're doing at Circadia, again, how we're helping to support you as Circadia partners when we know that treatments aren't necessarily an option for you. So if you haven't heard about our staycation and dropship program, what we're offering is a staycation at-home facial kit, where you'll see on your screen here, you get the lipid replacing cleansing gel, the post-peel balm, and the vitamin C, all in travel sizes. And for many of you who are asking on the questions whether we offer retail masks, it's not something that we offer as a permanent SKU. However, for this drop ship staycation facial, we are including our sample sizes of our caviar lime and passion fruit enzyme mask, as well as our marshmallow whip hydrating mask. So this is a great way to reach out to your customers, tell them, I'm sorry we had to cancel your appointment, or I'm sorry you're not going to be able to get in. Here's a full staycation facial that you can do at home, and you'll receive this facial complimentary with the purchase of any Circadia product. And it just has to be one. We would love it if it was 10, but we know that, some people might not be completely out of all of their products at once. So for every Circadia retail product that your client purchases, they'll get one of these wonderful staycation facials. And to top that, we're also shipping it. So we're delivering it directly to your customer. Now, there is an $8 shipping fee that's involved in the staycation dropship, but the perceived value of the home care staycation kit is $50. So they're getting this home care $50 kit, and they're getting charged the $8 shipping. Okay, so much information in 3.5 hours.
And we went about an hour and 15 minutes over what we expected to, but we really appreciate everyone tuning in, wanting to participate, wanting to stay connected. So thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. And this is just one of many more to come. We're going to make sure that we have so much more available. We're going to be focusing on, as Caitlin mentioned, the peels next week. And we'll have a lot more. We're going to be sending out some additional links for the educational resources that I mentioned from some of our other industry friends. And again, we just want to keep everybody to stay encouraged, stay safe, follow the guidelines that are being implemented, and we will certainly stay as connected with you and keep you updated as to what it is that we're doing here and anything new that we come up with. So again, thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate your time, and let us know if there's any other additional questions that come up, but we'll have the recording for the webinar for those of you that that had other time commitments, and we will all talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye. Thanks, everybody.